open. Good evening to everyone. My name is Paula Reid. I'm the Mayor of Kingborough. It's Monday the 7th of February 2022 and being 5:30 p.m. I now officially declare this meeting open. We are of course online because of the continuing COVID situation, so a very warm welcome to everyone who is watching along on YouTube this evening. I need to advise you that Council's policy is that our meetings are recorded and made publicly available on our website. So in accordance with Council's policy, I'm going to ask the General Manager to confirm that the audio recording has commenced.
Recording has commenced, Mayor.
Thank you, General Manager. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, pay respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal community. Our attendees this evening are myself, Councillor Reid, Deputy Mayor Councillor Westwood, Councillor Bastone, Councillor Cordova, Councillor Fox, Councillor Gladeright, Councillor Midgley, Councillor Street and Councillor Wass. From our staff this evening, we have the General Manager, Mr Arnold, the Chief Financial Officer, Mr Breen, the Director of Engineering Services, Mr Reeve, our Chief Information Officer, Mr Molt, the Director of Governance, Recreation and Property Services, Mr Smee, the Director of Environment, Development and Community Services, Dr Stevenson, the Manager of Development Services, Ms Tyler Moore, our NAB Coordinator, Ms Quinn, and our Executive Assistant, Mrs Morton. And we have apologies this evening from Councillor David Gray. Confirmation of minutes on page 1. The motion is that the minutes of the open session of Council meeting number 1, which was held on the 17th of January 2022, be confirmed as a true record. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Also move.
Sorry, I need to see hands because I can't. Yep, sorry. So I saw Councillor Bastone, apologies, and that was Councillor Fox, was that you? Thank you. So moved Councillor Bastone, seconded Councillor Fox. All those in favour?
Aye.
Yep. Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Workshops held since the last council meeting. There was a workshop on Monday the 24th of January, and that was with the Kingborough Lions Football Club in relation to the Lightwood Park development. Turning now to page 2, declarations of interest. Does any councillor have a declaration of interest that they'd like to share? No? Oh, Councillor Fox.
Yes, I do. I'd like to declare an interest in the significant tree list amendment on page 4, but I'll be staying in the meeting for the discussion.
Thank you very much. Are there any other conflicts of interest? Thank you. Transfer of agenda items. Is there any item on the agenda that a councillor would like to move from open into closed or closed into open session? No, thank you. Questions without notice from the public. As we're holding the meeting online, obviously there are no questions on notice from the public. Questions on notice from the public. At the time the agenda was completed, there were no questions on notice from the public, but if you do wish to submit a question to be answered for the next meeting agenda, you can send it to by email to kc@kingborough.tas.gov.au. Questions without notice from councillors. Now, just before I go to that, can I just remind people, if possible, could you, if you wish to speak, could you please use the raise your hand icon that is in the top row? It's just there's a little bit of a lag I've just noticed with some of the audio. So if you speak, I might not hear you immediately. And in this way, I also get a list of the order in which people raise their hands. So that's helpful as well. So just a reminder for that to make things run smoothly. Thank you very much. And looking at that list, I think I have Councillor Gladeright first.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got 3 questions, please. Firstly, is the council aware of ducks that are crossing on the Huon Highway just before John Street? So when you come down off the southern outlet and you exit down into Kingston, there seem to be some ducks crossing in that area just before you get to that small roundabout. I believe that's a state growth road, the Huon Highway, but does council have any responsibility there in terms of safety with the ducks?
Just thinking who might answer this. I normally will look around the room and look at one of the officers who looks enthusiastic, but I've just got photos of them all up on the screen. So I'm thinking maybe Mr. Reeve.
Good. It's not there. David. Yep.
Yes, through you, Mayor. Wonderful choice, Mayor. Yes, certainly where we have some of those instances. I believe in the Channel Highway section there may be some signage up there that reminds people that their ducks also cross at that point too, presumably coming from the Kingston wetlands. So yes. I'm not aware particularly of these ones that might be crossing across the Huon Highway area. But it's happy to take it on notice and see whether it's worthwhile putting any signage up there. But bearing in mind we're obviously going to be doing some works in that area fairly shortly as well at the same time. So maybe they'll find somewhere else to cross.
Great, thank you. So my second question is, while I've got you actually, Mr. Reeve, is relating to the long swishy grass in the municipality. I know this was raised recently at our last budget review meeting. There is a lot of angst in the community. I don't know if other councillors are feeling that from people, but I'm getting a lot of feedback and there's a lot of chatter on social media about the long swishy grass and the road verges. There's a lot of comments about the 67 fires preceding a wet spring, just like we've experienced. So I was just wondering if you could provide an update. I think you mentioned that we might have to allocate some more money to the capital works budget, but does that mean that this won't be addressed until then, or can you just give us an update, please?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, it's one of those unfortunate years there where we get a very wet spring and lead into summer, and obviously it had the hot weather as well at the same time there. So obviously we're getting an extended growing season, which does happen from time to time. What we do allow for in our slashing budget there is a little bit of extra money there to do some extra cuts in particular areas that might need them. So our program started around about the end of October when it normally does there, and it's due to finish about the end of February. So there's still some areas there we haven't actually got to yet to start off with. And then I guess the ones that were done early in the piece there, because we've had such a growing season, they may need another touch up in terms of going back there and doing another cut there. So I guess it depends on the particular area there. So I'd be happy to take on board any particular areas of concern there, have those ones looked at and work out whether or not they require an extra cut or not. The other bit you're alluding to in terms of the discussion about budget deliberations there was actually tied up a little bit more with some of our rural drain cleaning, which will certainly be a point of discussion at the councillor budget workshop.
Just to follow on through you, Mayor, in terms of lodging then all these areas, because I don't know if you've seen on some of the social media sites recently, there is a whole lot of chatter about this topic. How do you want me to go and ask those people for specific addresses, or I'm continually reminding people to lodge service requests at the KC at Kingborough, but how do we sort of resolve this when there seems to be such a widespread angst, do you think?
Through you, Mayor. Look, the best way to deal with it is if it's an area-based thing. So it may well be that someone's complaining about a particular road and someone else is complaining about a particular road, but it may be in the same area there. The best thing to do is actually still collate that information through our customer service, because what they will do is they will still provide that information as service requests. That will go up to our depot there, and they'll then do the collation of that and actually say, well, has that area been done or not? Has it not been done, in which case we need to send the contractor out there to have a relook at it and see whether or not it requires an extra cut in that area. And that's probably still the best way to actually manage it. Certainly it's not untoward that we will have years like this where we will have those type of growth patterns happening. And I guess we'll just respond to those ones there and do the extra cuts as is required.
All right. Thank you. And just lastly, for my last question, just on behalf of a resident who's picked up that the play equipment at Kingston Park, the water play, isn't functioning at the moment, and I just said that I'd find out when that was scheduled to be fixed.
Mr. Smee, maybe?
Thank you, Mayor. I wasn't aware that that particular item of equipment wasn't functioning at the moment, but happy to follow that up.
Thank you.
I am aware that late last year that it wasn't for a period of time because I was over there and the water levels were quite high, so there was a blockage somewhere, and so they did have to close it down, but I thought that work was going to be done at the time. That was in December, so we'll certainly get that followed up because it was a bit of a safety issue that it was far deeper than it should have been. Yeah, I was under the impression that it had been resolved, but we'll certainly follow that up.
Thank you. It's such a wonderful piece of equipment, and water play at this time of year is really well appreciated. Thank you very much.
I've got next Councillor Westwood and then Councillor Bastone.
Thank you, Mayor. My question was also in relation to the roadside slashing. Just wondering, I understand we have had a protracted wet growing season, and it is particularly difficult during these years to respond with our normal service delivery at our normal service delivery standards. Just checking that, is that the only reason for the increase in the roadside swishy grass, or have we actually changed our service level, the provision of our service for roadside slashing?
Mr. Reeve.
Yes, through you, Mayor. Certainly haven't changed our service provision or our timing for when we're actually doing the works. So I would certainly be putting it down to the fact that it has been a high growing season. Bearing in mind it's the same issue we face with a lot of our other fixtures, such as our sporting fixtures and playgrounds and wherever else we're actually mowing grass as well. And I'm sure everybody else is facing it in terms of their own residents here and in terms of how much growth they've had.
Thank you, Mr. Reeve.
Next I have Councillor Midgley and then Councillor Bastone. Sorry. Well, according to the fail-safe list that Microsoft Teams gives me, so I can only rely on technology here. So Councillor Midgley, then Councillor Bastone.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions as well. I think it's summertime, lots of time to ponder on questions and meeting community out in the public. Mayor, my first one is in regards to Hunting Field, and I'm aware staff are aware of this matter, but I thought I'd just ask some further clarification. So the link on the Community TAS website, which forms part of the community feedback for stage 2 and 3, is not the latest version of the master plan. And I'm wondering, is Community TAS aware of this? And wouldn't it be best practice to have the latest version of the master plan on the Communities TAS website link, so that people can, provide that direct feedback and consultation in relation to the latest version of the master plan?
I'll ask Ms. Tyler Moore if she would like to address that, but I think, as you'd be aware, that would be a matter for Communities TAS to address, that they have the correct version of the master plan up there. There's nothing that, unless they would like to take our suggestion. But Ms. Tyler Moore, would you like to add anything to that?
No, Mayor, I've got nothing to add to that. I agree. It's up to Department of Communities to update and manage their consultation. It's not something we are involved in.
Thank you. Councillor Midgley, have you got a further question? You're on mute.
Sorry. On Friday, there was a meeting actually was invited and I couldn't attend, an update on planned projects for DSG and Jacobs. I think it was in regards to Algona Road and other local projects. If any staff attended, is there any email or update for councillors in regards to this? It was organised by Luke Roberts from Jacobs. It was in regards to the Kingston bypass duplication.
Mr. Reeve, are you able to assist us with that one?
Through you, Mayor, yes, there certainly was a couple of staff members that actually attended that particular meeting. So bearing in mind, Jacobs is going through a process in terms of gathering feedback from all the various different stakeholders as relates to the works they intend at Algona, and also on the bypass as well, but particularly on Algona they've been concentrating on at the moment. So part of what they've been doing is developing I guess the methodology in terms of how they're going to assess all the competing priorities. So there's been a couple of meetings so far that has gone through that and sought stakeholder comment. This was just another one of those follow-up meetings for that. But happy to get a summary and send it to councillors if they wish.
Thank you, that'd be appreciated.
Thank you. A further question, Mayor, regarding the bus stop audit. I cannot recall if we have actually seen a report in regards to this, and the reason I'm asking is seeing so many young people out and about standing at bus stops without shelters, and we soon know the cold weather is coming and we're facing this predicament again. So I'm wondering if there has been a report regarding this audit and what other actions moving forward, and will we see more bus shelters in our area?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor, certainly this has been a project that DSG has been working on for a little while, and provided there's been some input provided by council officers, and they've identified a number of different areas there which they want to pursue further for particularly for making sure they've got accessible bus stops there, but that will also include where there may be shelters, where there may not be shelters. Also, you know, the lead up to the bus stops there, how you get to the bus stops as well at the same time. So they have put out a package of works to a consultant to actually do some of that design work. But I haven't heard too much back about the actual timing of getting that further information back off the consultant. So it'll be something that's on my list to actually email them and get a bit extra information on that one.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just ask a further question on that one. So have they sought community feedback in regards to that report and actions moving forward, or are they liaising with any of our council access and advisory committees in regards to that as well, to ensure accessibility and where the community actually would like to see bus shelters?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor, I believe they have. So they have actually approached the community, but there's another package of work for the consultant as well. So I think they've done some prelim work on that aspect of it, but there is more that would need to be done when they start to get into the conceptual detailed design, which is what the consultant's going to be doing. So they'll need to obviously look at all those other stakeholders as well as part of the individual projects that have been selected.
Thank you. A question further, Mayor, to what Councillor Gladebright asked in regards to the park and things aren't working. I'm wondering if it would be suitable to perhaps put a sign at the park stating that if there is any damage or equipment not working, to put the council KC email or a phone number so people can directly report it there and then when they see things.
I think that's a great idea. If the General Manager could perhaps make a note of that and we can progress that. Thank you.
Thank you. And the question, Mayor, was regarding the GM calendar, the meeting with Mr. Dean Cocker and Mr. Joseph Cromie on the 12th of January. Interested to know any more information on that, please.
The General Manager, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. That meeting was had twofold purpose. Firstly, to discuss their ongoing developments at Spring Farm and Whitewater, and also to flag that they will be probably lodging a Section 43A application for a permit and amendment to the regional land use boundary. They own a parcel of land that's just out, that it is outside the boundary that they believe is appropriate for rezoning. And at some stage that will become a formal application, I suspect, and come before council.
Thank you.
Next I had Councillor Bastone, then Councillor Wass. Councillor Bastone.
Thank you. One of mine is about the wavy grass as well, but it's not just roadside, it's at the beach at Conningham in the car park area. There's very long grass all around there, and according to the people who live there, it hasn't been cut for 2 years. And I'm just wondering if we could have someone perhaps go and look at that, considering how many people are using the beach at the moment because of the great weather. That's my first thing to Mr. Reeve.
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. So this is the Conningham car park you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy for someone to have a look at that.
Right, thank you. And my other one is regarding the Beretta reuse shop. I'm not sure who to direct that to, Mayor. I'll get you to pick someone.
I reckon that'd be lucky Mr. Reeve as well.
Oh, Mr. Reeve, I'm so sorry. I'm just wondering when the policy changed. Now, if you go to buy something there, you cannot pay for it and then come and collect it. So if it's larger than will fit in your car, you have to go away, get whatever transport you want and come back in the hope that it's still there when you come back. And I was just wondering when this policy had changed. I'm talking about things like wardrobes and, you know, very large pieces of furniture. So when did our policy actually change on this?
Mr. Reeve.
You, Mayor, I'm not sure about that one. I'd have to take that one on notice there, but it seems eminently sensible to me that if you went to the shop there and shopped around and saw a large item there and you wanted to make sure that was retained for you to return there, that you'd be able to do that. So happy to chase that up and see what that might be happening there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is, I'm wondering whether there's any data available for COVID-19 for Council, and do we have Kingborough numbers for infections, testings, vaccinations, and vaccinations both for adults and children under 12?
General Manager, can you assist us with this one? There are no figures that I've seen come through from the state government, but Mr. Arnold might be able to help.
Thank you, Mayor, but probably not much, except to say that I haven't seen any of the data that is forming this question from Councillor Wass. So we'll have to take that on notice and see what we can find out.
And if we may continue there, can we seek that, obviously, which you're talking about, so that we can compare Kingborough's rate with other local government areas within the state?
Thank you. Yep, we will do that. The last figures that I saw were back in December, and Kingborough, I think, was about second in the state in terms of the highest rates, but that was before it was made available to children. So it'll be certainly interesting to get some updated figures. Now, I've still got hands up from Councillor Bastone and Councillor Midgley. Do I assume that that is because you haven't lowered your hands after your questions? I'd say so. Okay, thank you. I just had one further question. Sorry, Mr. Reeve, it's you again. But my question just related to, we've already talked about the roadside grasses being quite high, but I've also had raised with me quite a few times, and I know you and I have had a conversation about this, but the state of some of the roundabouts where they are quite overgrown, like the Fork in the Road one, the one at Margate at Beach Road. And I know the issue there is that they are all the property of state growth, but I'm just wondering, I know there was a proposal for us to take them over and maintain them, and we were waiting for state growth to come back to us. I'm wondering if, since the last time we spoke about this, there's been any movement on their part.
Through you, Mayor, no movement on their part, although I have tried to contact them a couple of times in terms of actually trying to progress the matter. But it does sit on my list again to hassle them again. The last we'd actually left it at is that they had expressed a willingness for us to actually undertake the work on their behalf for 2 of the roundabouts, which they'd been getting some grief about for exactly what you just mentioned there. And they'd provide us some information. I'd provide us some queries back about that information, and I've yet to hear back from anybody on that list. So I will endeavour to try and bring that one to a head.
Thank you. It appears the wheels at the Department of State Growth turn very slowly. It would be really nice to progress that, because I noticed in the last few days how overgrown those ones are, and also the one at the bottom of Algona Road on Roslyn Avenue also. So that's something that is concerning residents in terms of the presentation of our municipality. And I keep trying to explain that it's beyond our control when we're working on it. So thank you very much for your efforts in relation to that. I think that brings us to the end of questions without notice from councillors, because I don't see any further lights on. So we move now to, still on page 2, we've got questions on notice from councillors. There are 2 that are printed there in the agenda. The first one was from Councillor Wass, with an officer's response from the very busy Mr. Reeve in relation to infestation of weeds. And the second one was from Councillor Grace and an officer's response from Mr. Dool in relation to Snug Rivulet. So the open session now adjourns and the Planning Authority now commences at 5:56 p.m. So turning to page 4, and we have PSA 2 of 21, Amendment to the Kingborough Interim Planning Scheme 2015 to update the significant tree list, with a recommendation on page 10. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Okay, I do need a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Wass. And do I have a seconder? Please just raise your physical hand. Seconder and Councillor Gladright. Thank you. Councillor Wass.
Thank you, Mayor. This is something that I've always thought we should have and we should update. And I think as I go through the report, there are a number of issues that have become relevant to us going ahead. In page 5, for argument's sake, we're talking at 2.4 to delist 2 trees that don't exist anymore. And I raise that for the simple reason, if we're going to have any update or any register, we need to maintain it. And I think you could say, if we don't know there were 2 trees no longer there, we're not really maintaining what we've got. If I just go through the page, because I've got a few questions with it. On page 9, it's proposed to publicly exhibit the planning scheme amendment for a minimum period of 28 days. And it says twice in a newspaper circulating in the area. I assume one is the Kingborough Chronicle. Would that be correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. When I get to page 12, I know there's in the basis or the start of the actual report, there is no risk comment. Yet we have risk comments in all items we deal with, but no risk in this. In Victoria, not last year, the year before, there were 8 deaths in 8 months because of local government trees that fell on people and unfortunately killed them. And my concern is we need to look after our community, not just our trees. And although I'm happy and support the significant tree register, I think we need to be very serious as we monitor these trees. Because to my belief, the buck's got to stop somewhere. And if we don't follow the right course of action and someone is either seriously injured or death creates or injury occurs to them, then I believe that someone needs to be liable. It's not up to them to seek insurance. It needs to be, in this case, council. Council needs to take a liability test on this with its insurer. I've got here my question. What about trees included in this assessment that are not supported by the landowner? because I don't believe that is the right way to go. We need to educate people, not dictate. And I'd like to know, are there any trees where the landowner does not support the register? Sorry, does not support the tree.
Ms Tyler Moore, could you assist us with that, please?
Through you, Mayor, the trees for nomination haven't gone out to public notice yet, as described in the report. When it goes out for that 28 days, we'll consider any submissions from the public regarding that, which may include that they don't wish the tree to be listed, and then a Section 39 report will go to the council meeting for determination as to whether it proceeds as part of the nomination to proceed to the Planning Commission for consideration.
Thank you. I noticed in tree number 1 that there is some decay and fire damage to the lower trunk, and there's some very large dead sections, decay and hollows in the crown, but it's still worthy of being listed, and I just wonder why. Is it safe for another 5 years? Is it safe for 10, or is it going to fall over tomorrow or drop a branch tomorrow?
Well, Councillor Wass, so as that section there says, the arborist suggests that it has a life expectancy of another 30 to 50 years.
Where I'm coming from, Mayor, is safety. I don't want someone killed by it. Safety is paramount from my aspect.
Yep. Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, some of these specific questions about the trees and the listings, Liz Quinn, who was part of the assessment panel, can assist with those. So if Liz would like to answer that question.
Thank you. Ms Quinn.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so with the tree that Councillor Wass is speaking about, which is up near the mountain bike park, we have had an arborist assess every tree that's been recommended for listing in terms of risk using the international standard. We always use the QTRA standard. That assessment, we've done that right from the start. So every tree that is listed there in front of you tonight has already had a risk assessment done. And as you might be familiar, those risk assessments look not only at the structure of the tree, but also at the target risk. And so the likelihood that there's going to be someone under that tree if it does indeed fail. And of course, that's going to be really different depending on where the tree is. So the tree, for example, on Kingston Beach Esplanade is going to have a very different risk than this tree, for example, which is quite a long way from the mountain bike park and at this point in time, not near any tracks or roads.
Thank you, Ms Quinn. Councillor Watt.
Tree number 2. I take it in due course we will speak to the property owner and the other 3 properties that tree overhangs.
Through you, Mayor. We have already actually spoken to all of the landowners who have trees nominated on their land. They've either nominated them themselves, and therefore, of course, they would like the tree to be listed, or we've been in contact with them. So you can take from tonight, they might change their mind as this process goes forward through the Commission, but at this point in time, we haven't put forward a tree for listing where there's a landowner who doesn't want that to occur. We have also had some consultation with adjacent landowners, but most of that will occur through this next stage.
So do I hear you right now that we have had consultation with all the landowners?
Yes.
Because I thought you said before we hadn't.
Tasha said that we hadn't, but I'm on the panel and so I'm much closer to the process.
On tree number 6, I'm just wondering how often this tree will be inspected for safety. And while we're talking about this area, I noticed that the Norfolk Island pine is not mentioned, and I'm just wondering why not.
So when you say tree number 6, could I just clarify, because tree number 6
Sorry,
is
item 6
number
on
of trees.
17.
Okay, so yeah, it's a group of trees.
Yes.
Ms Quinn.
Sorry, I missed the last bit. Is it item 6? So are you speaking about the trees at Kingston Beach?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. So the question was about the Norfolk Island pine?
No, how often will these trees be inspected for safety?
Those trees are actually inspected regularly already because of the high target risks that they have, because of how many people are walking under them and parking near them and things. So my understanding that that's carried out by the reserves coordinator, Scott Rollins, but my understanding is those trees are already inspected.
And I think we've got one tree there that's got more wire in it than it's got timber. Is that correct?
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor, no, that is not correct. There is a tree at Kingston Beach in front of the main shopping precinct. It's a stunning blue gum, and it does have cables in it at risk again, but it does not have more cables than it has tree, no.
Thank you, Stacey. The Norfolk Island pine tree is not mentioned, and yet most people would suggest that that is the most significant tree along the esplanade.
Ms Quinn. I think we might have lost Ms Quinn. She's frozen on my screen. No, she's here.
I'm back, sorry. Through you, Mayor, the Norfolk Island pine, was that the question?
Yes, it was.
It is part of the listing. So I think the listing talks about a blue gum, but there's actually a number of Australian native groups that are also part of that esplanade trees and the Norfolk pines.
So we are considering that's been included?
Yes.
Thank you. Just bear with me, please, Mayor. Now, on item number 11, on 25A, Osborne Esplanade, is it council staff's intention to plant further white gums now to replace this tree, which has a life expectancy of maybe up to 10 years?
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor, this might have been discussed through the coordinator. I'm not aware of that, and my assessment of that site would be there's not actually room on that site to plant trees because the canopy, the white gum, takes up most of that grass at the front. So we would try. It's a good strategy, and we would do that where we can. But I think in this situation, there wouldn't be room to do that at this site. So we would have to wait until that tree has become an unacceptable risk, and when it does that, we will remove it.
According to the report, it's in poor health with a life expectancy of less than 10 years. My thought is that we should be planting one now to replace it rather than replace it when it falls down or when it dies.
Any further comments, Councillor Was?
Yes, page 12. The road reserve on 59 Rosalind Avenue. I'm appalled at this. I think this needs to go. It looks a nice tree, but it's already proven on a couple of occasions it's dropped branches, and there'll be more branches to be dropped. And henceforth I come back to who pays the ferryman if someone is injured.
Ms Quinn.
Thank you, Mayor. This tree has had many arborist reports, and it's actually, the latest one was in October 2021. As we took this nomination for delisting forward, the tree is an acceptable risk. It has very good structure. Trees will always, as we know, will from time to time drop limbs, and trying to find a tree that will drop a limb is like a needle in a haystack. If we wanted to manage that risk, we would be taking out every tree in Kingborough really on our land. So that's not the approach that the council takes at this time. The quantified tree risk assessment method, as I said, looks at target risk, which is quite high in this situation because of the road. So that has been taken into consideration. But the tree, each time it has an arborist assessment, it comes back as recommended that it's an acceptable risk. This time it came back with some dead wood that needed to be removed, and that work has been completed by council.
Yeah, and I'm just about to wind up, Mayor. I find that interesting because the arborist never picked when it, and since that time, has dropped 2 big branches. So much for the arborist report. But my number one question on that tree is who is going to become liable if someone or a number of people in a car is killed? With the Victorian what do they call when they investigate the coronial reports into the 8 people in Melbourne that were killed, were not very sympathetic to local government, because local government failed, in their opinion, to do what should have been done and get rid of some trees. And yet here we are, knowing that a tree is unsafe, knowing its history, and yet we're going to leave it standing. So I certainly don't agree with that. Thank you, Mayor. That's my time.
Thank you, Councillor Wass. I've got Councillor Cordover next, followed by Councillor Westwood and Councillor Street. Councillor Cordover.
Thank you, Mayor. So my first, I just want to thank the author and the authoriser for this work, and the significant tree policy is an important one. It's interesting here that the trees that we're talking about is this tiny proportion of all of Kingborough's trees, and unfortunately it's still a very small proportion. So trees, we know, hold an enormous benefit for health and well-being, for ecosystem services, for biodiversity, and for mitigating the climate emergency. But of course, here it falls within the purview of strategic planning and development services, which by its very nature is geared not towards necessarily environmental sustainability, but instead it's geared towards a human-centric dominion and hegemonic approach. Now, that's not a criticism of strategic planning or development services. It's merely a reflection on a larger system that is in dire need of reform. However, it's an opportunity for us to consider an environment in all policies approach. And I'm always in feeling mixed emotions when I come across the significant tree register, in that we're looking here at only 33 trees have been nominated, 11 are suggested for inclusion. At my last check, there were 23 trees on the significant tree register in total. And yet we know for a fact that if you look at the significant tree assessment criteria of aesthetic significance, size, age, landscape significance, historical significance, rarity of species, variety or genome, and unusual physical features, I think we could all, based on that assessment, there should be thousands of trees that are in line for protection. But unfortunately, that's not the case at the moment. I do have a couple of questions, because I think we really ultimately need to reformulate our approach to the significant tree register, for example, to have an exclusion, a by exclusion or specific exemption approach. So, for example, we're looking at a lot of trees here that are 80 or 100 years old. My first question would be, why isn't there an automatic protection on all trees over the age of 80 years old? Because we know of the ecosystem services, the health and wellbeing benefits that they provide, and the biodiversity importance of trees over that age. So why wouldn't we have a system by which all trees over the age of 80 are automatically named as significant, unless by exclusion or specific exemption? That's my first question.
Ms. Quinn.
Through you, Mayor. I think this is it's an interesting question, and to enable it would require quite a lot of assessment work, which would also go hand in hand, I guess, with a street tree policy, because it really takes quite a lot of audit work that we don't have that data. So some of that could be remotely sensed to work out the size of trees. And I get this, after you actually could identify which trees they were, it would then require changing the statutory tools. So that be the planning scheme, where the council had its own tree policy, and it could list them there to manage things on our own land, as well as a significant tree policy, and any potential future bylaw that regulated trees on private land. So all possible, potentially, except the planning scheme, which we don't have as much control over what those rules are.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, I think that's a ringing endorsement for a street tree strategy, which, as you'll know, I'm a huge proponent of. I've got a couple more questions, though. What is the cost of having trees on the significant tree register? And this is speaking to that point that there were 33 trees nominated. What possible benefit is there in denying those 22 trees entrance onto the register? If there is no cost or minimal cost, why not add as many trees as possible?
Ms. Quinn.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the answer to that is about the rigour of the significant tree register. So I think it's really important that the significant tree register has a whole lot of rigour, so that we don't then end up listing all of our trees on the significant tree register, and it just dilutes the significance of them, if you like. So it is for those particularly special trees that meet the criteria. So there are 245 trees that have been recommended. So yes, there are 11 nominations, but within those there are 245 trees. So there are a lot more than what it might look like, and there are already 425 trees on the register. So I do in some ways agree with you, but I also would not want to dilute the importance of those trees by adding all trees, if you like.
Thank you. A couple more questions, Mayor, but I would just make the point that, for example, the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area is some hundreds of thousands of hectares, and it doesn't dilute the significance of the TWA to have protected that entire area. So I think we're probably leaning towards protecting too few trees in order to, not dilute the significance of the significant tree register. But my next question is actually about how a situation emerged in which there were some trees that were proposed for listing, but they've actually got already a development application plan for removal in place. So, for example, on page 30, item 35, it's DAS 2007-82. So that was a tree that really it meets 3 of the criteria at least, and yet it's been deemed it's already, I guess, had its death sentence put on it. How can a situation like that emerge, and how do we make sure that that doesn't happen again?
Ms. Quinn.
Thank you, Mayor. That situation emerged from my understanding, and Tasha Tyler-Moore may be able to add to this answer. The tree was actually nominated after the development application had been approved for the subdivision. So council had already assessed the subdivision, allowed that tree, I think, to be removed and offset, and then the nomination was put in. And so if that tree, the trees at this point in time, without the bylaw in place, don't have a level of protection while they're nominated, don't have a statutory level of protection while they're nominated. So it's not until they move into the planning scheme and make it through this planning scheme amendment process we're talking about that they actually have a level of protection.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you. Nearly done, Mayor. And I might have got my trees backwards there. So there was one tree that met 3 of the criteria, which we were referring to just then. And then there was another tree which appears to have been removed as a result of road construction. And it's a very similar question that, to me, that firstly, it's anathema to a significant tree register. It kind of begs the question, what's the point of having one, and what's the point of keeping it so exclusive if, in fact, a road construction team can come in and knock it down? To me, that's a great abrogation of our responsibility as councillors to have made a robust significant tree register. I'm not casting any aspersions on staff. I think it's on the councillors to protect trees in line with the community wishes. So I was just hoping for maybe a bit more detail about what happened with that construction situation.
Ms. Quinn.
Through you, Mayor, I think that question is probably more related to planning. So Tasha Tyler-Moore may have a better answer.
Ms. Tyler-Moore, are you familiar with that?
Yes, Mayor. It was to do with the Summerlees Road intersection upgrade, and it was unavoidable to be able to remove the tree. And this is always one of the difficulties between growth in a municipality or growth in an urban area and some of the things that have to go. So that was unavoidable. They did do some additional planting to offset that tree, but certainly agree that the importance of the significant trees to try and avoid the register is to try and avoid the removal of those as much as possible, but in that instance it couldn't be avoided.
Thank you. Councillor Cordova.
Yeah, I'll just finish my contribution by saying that we're in a climate and biodiversity emergency. And again, it's such a great shame that we look at this through the prism of a human-centric, hegemonic kind of dominion approach where we are manipulating and destroying our environment, and we call it development. But in fact, it's coming at the expense of our human health and well-being. It's certainly coming at the expense of our children's well-being and their future. And I think, when we think about some of the things that have to go in the name of development, Right now, we have this very exclusive significant tree policy where I feel like there are far too few trees that are making it through this process, and I will be strongly advocating for strengthening that. And I think that the people of Kingborough have already spoken quite loudly and quite clearly about the significance that they place on protecting trees in our municipality. So that's why we need a street tree strategy, and that's why we need to strengthen this policy so that it's not just one continuation.
Can I just say you're straying? We're sitting as a planning authority right now, and you keep straying away from the topic at hand. So I'll just draw you back to that and meeting procedures around sitting as a planning authority, if you don't mind. So just a reminder for yourself and other councillors who are yet to speak, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I do appreciate that. And look, I think I've said my piece. And again, I want to thank the staff. They do a tremendous job. And I do appreciate all that they do, and I hope that we can work together to improve this situation. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some questions as well in relation to this agenda item. We say at 5, public consultation 5.1, council officers receive no opposition from the landowners to any of the listings proposed. Just in terms of the landowner and the consultation that we've done to date, noting that we will be going out for 28 days, I believe, so that people still have an opportunity to provide feedback. I'll just work through in order. Item number 1, 10 Kingston View Drive, Kingston, just to double check that that tree is not in any way, the listing of that tree is not in any way going to impede on a potential future construction of a Spring Farm link road, please.
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor, we have actually already, because that design has already commenced, I've already talked to the engineering design team about that. And at this point in time, for the design that's been done, which of course hasn't been finalised, that tree can be retained, and it looked like it was going to be about 11 metres from the edge of the road. So we had an arborist assess that. And at that point of time, it looked like the tree could be retained and the road in the current design be built, and there would just be a little bit of dead limbing that would be required to reduce risk.
Thank you. Item number 2, in terms of consultation with landowners, this tree overhangs onto 4 properties. So the recommendation is to list the trees being made by a council officer. Have we spoken to not just the landowner that the tree is situated on, but the landowners of the other 3 properties as well?
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor, we have not formally spoken to those other landowners, and that will be done through this first lot of public consultation.
So specifically, we're putting this out for public consultation, but will you be specifically engaging with those 3 properties?
Yes, I believe we will.
Thank you. Item number 3, a similar situation. There's a tree at 2 Dallas Avenue, but it also overhangs 6 Oakley Avenue. Will we be specifically approaching the owners of 6 Oakley Avenue as part of the consultation?
Through you, Mayor, yes, we will, and we have already actually spoken to both of those landowners. And at this point of time, they were happy to support the nomination. One of the landowners actually nominated it themselves. So again, going forward, whether they change their mind during this consultation phase, but at this point in time, they're both happy to support it.
Thank you. Item number 8, 5 Belhaven Avenue, Taroona. The report notes that the nomination is for a new listing made by a resident in the street. Do I take it that that is not the resident that lives at 5 Belhaven Avenue? Is the first question.
Through you, Mayor, I would need to check. I thought it was the landowner, but you're right, it sounds like it's not. I know that the landowner supports the nomination because, as I said earlier, we have already checked that with the landowners where it's not council land. but I would have to check who the nomination was from.
Okay, that's fine as long as we have checked with the owners at 5 Belhaven Avenue. Item number 11, 25A Osborne Avenue, Kingston Beach. This tree is on council land. It's also outside the new toilet block, which gets a lot of foot traffic by members of the public using the toilets. It also is on the grass in front of the area where the Surf Lifesaving Club crosses. I'm just wondering, given that the arborist assessment indicates that the tree is in poor health with a life expectancy of less than 10 years, what is the real benefit in listing the tree? Given it's on council-owned land, so council would need to make a decision as to whether we removed it or not in the first place. Listing it seems... It doesn't necessarily seem sensible, because I don't think we'd have any intention at this point in time of removing the tree. So why do we need to list it, particularly if something did happen and the tree was unsafe? Why are we listing that tree when it's on our own land?
Ms Quinn.
Thank you, Mayor. Many of the trees that are nominated and recommended for listing, you'll notice, are on council land. In fact, the bulk of them are. So it's not that those trees don't have a level of protection being on council land, because as you point out, they do. It's more to acknowledge their significance. And there are situations where council undertakes development, obviously builds buildings and footpaths and things. And I think it gives those trees, it acknowledges their significance and ensures that council does do its due diligence for those trees, as opposed to all of the other trees that may not be on the register. You are absolutely correct. We did have thought long and hard about this tree because it is in declining health, and this is a tree that a lot of you may notice through time has been in its death knell, and then it comes back, and then it seems to keep recovering, but it does seem to be on a long-term decline. So as soon as this tree becomes an unacceptable risk, whether it or not it's on the significant tree register, it will be removed by council. Being on the register when it's on council land, the general manager is able to make a determination. If it's an unacceptable risk, it can be removed. It doesn't have to go through a long process through the commission. So it doesn't change our ability to maintain it or to manage that risk. The reason it's there is because it was considered as part of that corridor of trees that forms such a beautiful backdrop to Kingston Beach.
Thank you. Item number 12, as pointed out by Councillor Wass, I have been contacted by a number of concerned residents about this tree. It has dropped limbs onto the road on numerous occasions, and the road, I think it's even noted in the report, the road has been blocked off on occasion to tidy up the limbs that are dropped, which obviously poses a risk to pedestrians. I'm just wondering, I guess it's a question of risk appetite, really. So the assessment concluded that there's a 1 in 500,000 chance that the tree could cause serious injury or death. We know that it has recently, within the last 12 months, dropped limbs on a number of occasions. We have residents who have expressed concern. I'm not sure if my risk appetite is such that I would support keeping that tree there. The other point with that is it's mentioned that that council contact the owners of 63 Roslyn Avenue regarding the need to repair or tolerate the stone retaining wall damage. Who owns that retaining wall? Is that owned by council or is that owned by 63 Roslyn Avenue? And if it's owned by 63 Roslyn Avenue, are we, by keeping the tree, are we essentially imposing a cost on them to fix that stone wall for a tree that we know is already dropping limbs?
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor, my understanding is the stone wall is owned by the landowner, and council, if they haven't already, are definitely going to approach the landowner and speak to them. We haven't heard from the landowner they're not concerned about the wall, and if they are, they haven't come to council to my knowledge at this time, but we will be speaking to them about it. I think in reference to your earlier comments about the tree dropping limbs, as you would be aware, many trees drop limbs, and the moment that council decides to err and not take arborist advice, I think it just is a time to reflect and think about what else we're going to do then. So if we're not going to take the advice of an expert, and in this case there's been 2 different arborists assess that tree, because we were concerned, and we do hear the community's concern and the councillors' concern, and that is valid. So we did opt for getting 2 different arborists to look at the tree, both with very similar outcomes. As I say, we've done maintenance on the tree since that time and removed dead wood, which should really limit the limb drop. I would just ask you to reflect potentially on how will we make decisions, or how you would make decisions as a council, or expect staff to make decisions if we can't take that of the expert, which is a highly qualified arborist.
Can I just, sorry, Councillor Westwood, before you go on, I've got 2 of our staff who have got their hands up, so I suspect that they'd like to add something. I've got Dr. Stevenson and Ms. Tyler Moore. Dr. Stevenson.
Thank you. With apologies and through you, Mayor, that this is sometimes things have moved on a bit, but I just wanted to make a point regarding why there is no risk assessment at this stage. This is a planning authority matter. It's not a public insurance matter or a policy matter. So just so you understand why that's not in this report. I'm happy to talk to councillors in more detail at a future time around our public liability insurance. But I, as you may be aware, I sat for a number of years on the insurance board. And to answer concerns about who owns liability, well, ultimately, yes, council is liable, but if we have had an arborist report, have had a maintenance plan that we've followed, those things mean that the insurance will cover us. So then you're talking, so we don't have a liability issue as far as I'm concerned. We have a risk issue, a human risk issue, and then I refer to Liz's point about, well, we have to have some way of assessing that, and the arborist report is the way that we assess that human risk element. I think Ms. Tyler Moore might have some more to add.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. Ms. Tyler Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make just a comment about 59 Roslyn Avenue to keep in perspective. When we get complaints to council that limbs are falling, it's important to actually consider what is named perhaps by people what a limb is. So there are photographs of the limbs, which certainly some of those we would not classify as a limb, but simply bits of debris of the tree which come down from time to time. Obviously birds get in them, or the tree just shedding. So it's important to have in perspective about the drop of the limbs and quantify how big they are or how dangerous they are. And also just with respect to this point in time, you're just considering sending it to the TPC to have that input. So whilst we've heard from a couple of members of the public who are entitled to be passionate about their opinion on the tree, that's fine. By going to the advertising period, it does allow others of the public to also make comment, and it gives opportunity for consideration. So whilst 2 or 3 people may have a concern, there might be many more that really appreciate and value the tree. In saying that, it's unlikely we're going to get swamped with responses, because just given the nature of planning scheme amendments and how many we get, but it's important to consider that tonight's decision is just to move it for consideration at the TPC and to go through that process. It's not making the final decision at this point in time.
Thank you, Ms. Tyler Moore. Councillor Westwood. You're on mute.
That's all from me. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. So next I had Councillor Street.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got a couple of questions. to start off with, if I could please. We are talking about initiating this amendment. It's obviously a council initiated amendment to the planning scheme. I'm just wondering whether one of the members of staff could advise me on whether they take the view that if after the public consultation period we would be able to amend the amendment that we've initiated tonight to, say, for instance, remove or add a tree, or whether we would be required to withdraw the whole amendment.
Who's best placed to answer this? Ms. Tyler Moore?
Through you, Mayor, yes, you would come back. So we would do a Section 39 report and come back with recommendations about how the planning scheme amendment should be adjusted. So an example that you've dealt with previously was Kingston Park, where we made recommendation that as a result of the advertising, we consider this should be adjusted or that should be adjusted or excluded and so forth. So that same process will occur with this planning scheme amendment initiation.
Yep. So I suppose I understand that that we make a report to the Commission based on the public consultation with recommendations to the Commission. What I'm asking is there an opportunity to actually change the amendment itself, or simply to put in the report the recommendations that Council's making as a result of the public representation period? Does that make sense?
Yes. Through you, Mayor, yes, we would make that recommendation, and those recommendations by council are well entertained when they get to the Commission that it would be changed. It wouldn't be appropriate probably to add a tree that hadn't been previously advertised because the public didn't have the opportunity to consider that, but to take off a nomination or to modify the nomination or the recommendations around that would be suitable.
Okay. All right. I suppose the reason that I'm asking that is that I envisage that a couple of these are going to have significant public representation, and I can already tell that particularly one of the involved landowners down at Osborne Esplanade is likely to make a representation. If we entertain that, I just wouldn't want us to be in a position where we have to withdraw the entire amendment in order to get a single tree removed. And I suppose that does lead me onto my substantive contribution. And I suppose it's a piece of disappointment to start off with that perhaps given this is a council initiated amendment to the planning scheme, the fact that we haven't had a workshop to discuss these matters before we get to this point, because I feel like perhaps some of these issues that we've discussed tonight could have been resolved before we get to this point, given that it is our planning scheme amendment after all. So that's just a piece of disappointment, I guess, on that front. But I accept the advice from Ms. Tyler Moore that we will have an opportunity to amend our own amendment, as it were, once we've gone out to public consultation, and I'd encourage members of the public who are affected by these nominations and by this amendment to make representations, and we will review those and see where we get to in due course. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Street. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'd also like to echo the council staff and the work they've put into this report. It seems like a very long process to do this for, again, really, when we think about it, quite a small number of trees, and that's not to negate the work that has gone into nominating these trees, but if we look at the many, many significant trees across our municipality, driving through Woodbridge Hills, Tinderbox, Howden, all of we have, yes, many, many, many. Thank you, Councillor Street, for asking those questions in regards to that feedback and community consultation. I was very interested in that as well, because I feel no doubt we will have quite a few representations. But just to clarify on one of the points Ms. Tyler Moore said, in regards to, so if this goes out to the public and it's made aware, and I'm sure that there will be probably perhaps some media around it, people might not have heard of Significant Tree. What if then we get a lot of people wanting to nominate quite a high number of significant trees? So can we add extra ones if we're going to remove ones? Can extra ones be added, or is that the next process that you're talking about in the report, that we will have another significant tree process later in the year? Just wondering about that.
Through you, Mayor, no, we wouldn't add them at that stage. If there was an influx of nominations, then we would, I guess, consider withdrawing the amendment and starting it again, which I probably wouldn't encourage, because really we need to move on this. It's been quite some time since we've reviewed it. But of course, if the councillors felt that it was important enough to put those nominations in, we can do that. So no, you couldn't really add them because you didn't advertise that. It's more about the actual nominations and those that are listed that you would be advertising and allowing the public to consider. We did do public consultation and trying to get nominations, including media releases and social media. But yes, hopefully people will be more interested in and engaged once we go through this process. However, we don't get an enormous volume of responses to planning scheme amendments that are advertised.
And just also to clarify, if people do nominate a tree on private land, is that nomination confidential?
Ms. Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, that we don't notify them who made the nomination, no.
Thank you.
Any further speakers? Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make a comment, which is probably being a bit pedantic, but some of these trees that are shown as being like on page 17, that those trees are said to be between 60 and 80 years old. I can remember them being planted, and I'm not that old. And I think that they were planted by council, but we had 3 separate plantings on that location, and different trees were removed because they were inappropriate. They were dropping too many limbs, or they were too invasive. And I think that the current trees shown in the picture there are maximum 30 years old, or between 20 and 30 years old. And there are others which I think are seen as being 50 to 60 years old on page 15, and they were planted during the Jerry de Grice Blackmans Bay Foreshore Plan, which happened in the early 90s. So I guess they are quite young in the scheme of things, but they're certainly not 50 to 60 years old. So there are some discrepancies in the trees' ages, and I think some of those massive trees are probably well in excess of 100 years old, because they were big when I was little. So I don't think the arborists or whoever's made this report has looked very closely at the age of the trees in a technical way. I presume that would require a lot of resources, as Ms. Quinn says, but perhaps if we're going to indicate to the community an age of a tree, we need to be fairly accurate, because it does add to the significance of those trees to see how old they really are. That's just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any further contributions? Just before I ask Councillor Wass if he would like to sum up, look, I'm really pleased to see this before us because it is collectively adding 245 more trees to the significant tree policy register, and I concur with some of the comments made about the need for some more consultation with some of the landholders and other interested parties. For example, we know that the Kingston Beach Surf Lifesaving Club is interested in the tree at 25A Osborne Esplanade and what might happen there in the future, because they are a user of that land in front of the toilet blocks there at Kingston Beach for their activities. And so they will have an opportunity to be part of that consultation as we now move forward with it over the next 4 weeks. So I think this is a great step forward. I wanted to thank the staff for the tremendous amount of work that's gone into this, because there, as we all know, we had a significant backlog of nominations that, because of resourcing issues, that we weren't able to get through, and this process now is basically clearing all of that backlog. So be under no mistake, this was a tremendous amount of work, and I wanted to thank our strategic planner, Mr. Stander, and also Ms. Quinn for the work that they've put into this in progressing it to where it is. And I guess it's incumbent upon all of us now to be able to motivate the community to put in nominations in the future. So hopefully now that they see that we've got a process with some rigour around it, but also that we are committed as a council to moving this on more regularly and not letting nominations sit there for years, that will give them the motivation to put up further trees on the register for nomination in the future. And I think that we will, maybe we need to just look at the way that we advertise that. I know we have statutory obligations to advertise it as amendments to the planning scheme. We might have to find a sexier way to draw the community's attention to that so that they can understand what it is that we're trying to achieve through this. Thank you to all our staff for their work, and I will ask Councillor Wass if he would like to sum up.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As I indicated at the very beginning, I support the recommendation, the opportunity to have a draft planning scheme amendment, a significant tree register, they put new life into the register, which has probably lacked a little bit over the number of years, and for us to take a more active involvement in it so that when trees disappear, they're actually noted, not come up every 5 or 10 or so many years. I'm looking forward to the public exhibition for the time we've allocated and the consultation that will follow, particularly those people that are adjacent to the trees that we're looking to include.
You're on mute, Mayor.
I just realised that, beg your pardon. I'm just terrified my cat's going to start meowing, so when I'm not speaking, I mute so that you're all spared of that. She's got a very mournful meow at the moment. She's missing her companion that used to live here. So my apologies. So I'm going to put the recommendation now as printed on page 10. It's the amendment to the Kingborough Interim Planning Scheme 2015 to update the significant tree list. It was moved by Councillor Wass and seconded by Councillor Gladewright. Through a show of our physical hands, could everybody, all those in favour? Against? Okay, so if I've got this right, in favour was Councillors Wass, Street, Gladewright, Cordova, Midgley, Bastone, Fox and Reet, and those against, Councillor Westwood. Is that correct? Thank you very much. The motion is carried. We turn now to page 36. It's DA 630-2021 for 8 multiple dwellings, 1 existing at 165 Redwood Road, Kingston, with a recommendation on page 51. And I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Midgley and a seconder in Councillor Westwood. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. So just to note, the proposal is for a change in use of the existing dwelling to multiple dwellings and the development of 7 new multiple dwellings. They're arranged around the site and serviced by a central driveway, which has one way in part and circles a large existing tree centrally on the lot. There's a common area and a barbecue provided near the tree. I note as well that the development was designed to enable the retention of 80% of the very high conservation trees on the subject land, and there was some representations, and one that I find I just had to write next to it, like, you know, what a shame in regards to the comment that council staff acknowledge that the proposed Unit A will create shadowing onto the properties to the south in Grade E Court. However, the development standards in the planning scheme for sunlight to private open space of multiple dwellings now only apply to multiple dwellings on the same lot and not to private open space on adjoining lots. So it is a bit of a shame that that's been a change in the planning scheme, because we know how important sun is in Tasmania.
So, Councillor Midgley, I did ask that question this morning. Ms Tyler Moore can provide some information. It was just the wording of that, Ms Tyler Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. That's correct. Mayor reads it didn't actually change. The wording is a little misleading there. It's not something that altered. Clause 14.44 remains the same, but essentially, if the development did not meet the building envelope, then you would consider overshadowing. So 14.44 is specific about multiple dwellings and shadowing their own, whereas you would consider overshadowing under a different clause if it didn't meet the building envelope, but the development has met the building envelope in those instances. So they simply say if you meet the building envelope, don't need to consider overshadowing.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ms Tyler Moore. Further speakers? Can't see anyone's hand up. Oh, Councillor Cordova, thank you.
Thank you. I'll just start with a question, Mayor. Does that mean that so if I'm interpreting what Ms Tyler Moore just said, because that aspect doesn't exceed the building envelope, there are elements of the proposal that do, however, exceed setbacks, for example. Can I just get a bit more clarification on that?
Ms Tyler Moore.
Yes, through you, Mayor. So there's a number of areas of the application that need to be assessed against the performance criteria. So the first is setbacks and building envelopes for the dwellings, and that's to do with the garage that faces the street. So obviously that has no impact on the neighbouring properties. There's also clause 10.4.2A3, setbacks and building envelopes for dwellings, where the planner has inserted a diagram that shows you where it encroaches on the building envelope, and the assessment that follows and the justification why it's acceptable is included there, that it doesn't have a significant impact on the neighbouring properties. And then A4 is also about building envelopes, but that's to do with trees, so it's probably not related to what is being asked. And then the other aspects of the development that required assessments against performance criteria included site coverage and private open space, and that was just related to the location of the open space of that dwelling at the front. And front fences was the other area with respect to built form, and the remaining ones relate to code overlays and roads which don't consider amenity of neighbouring properties.
Thank you. Yeah, so that makes sense. Now, and so I note that those ones that don't affect it, we're looking at E.5.5.1A3. So like road and railway asset code, the existing road accesses and junctions, scenic landscape codes, appearance of buildings and works within scenic landscape areas, and works must not be visible from public spaces. So, Mayor, basically what I would say on this one, which I have struggled with, it's a very finely balanced development application, in my opinion. There are a number of areas that we've just gone through of deficiency, and it is worth noting the concerns that were raised in those four representations, which name up impacts on adjoining properties and on trees. Mayor, I would say that one very high conservation value tree is proposed for removal, Eucalyptus ovata, but as Councillor Midgley mentioned, it's pleasing that 4 remaining very high conservation value trees are proposed for retention, and that the report notes that the proposed unit development has been designed in such a way to enable the retention of 80% of those high conservation value trees on the subject land. Where the proposal does not meet the acceptable solution, such as the setbacks that we were referring to, the performance criteria are met in the opinion of the planning officer. One such example that I noted down is that the setbacks in the building envelopes where Unit C is outside the building envelope adjacent to the rear boundary, but in that case, according to the report, the location of Units B and C and associated access, car parking and driveways have been chosen with regard to the significant trees on site and their respective root zones. Basically, the way that I look at this is where it does deviate from the planning scheme, the performance criteria are there met, and the the deviation is not so significant as it would warrant rejecting this application out of hand. I think it's important noting the context of this development application as well, that we're looking at 165 Redwood Road in Kingston. This is an area where significant infill development is of course occurring, and that is probably in line with what's important for a growing community at this time. So, as I say, you know, I have enormous sympathy for those people who made the representations opposing this this proposal, but on this occasion, I feel like I feel like it does meet the planning scheme, and I do support the recommendation of the officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. Are there any further speakers? I just had one question. On page 37, where it outlines the proposal at 1.1, in the end of the second paragraph, it says 2 visitor parking spaces are provided. But then when I get to the actual recommendation, it says 3 visitor parking spaces. So could we just have confirmed, because when I looked at the plans, I see it seemed to indicate 3. Could you just confirm that that was just a typo in that first paragraph, Ms. Tyler-Moore?
Through you, Mayor, I just need to look at the plans again. Yes, so there are 3 visitors spaces indicated on the plan, drawing number 102, and they're indicated by a red V on there. So yes, it's an area that there are 3 provided.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, the motion was moved by Councillor Midgley, so I'll ask Councillor Midgley if she would like to sum up. No, thank you. I'll put the motion. It's got the recommendation is as printed on page 51. There are how many? 13 parts to that permit, as well as the advice. It is for DA 21-630, 8 multiple dwellings, 1 existing at 165 Redwood Road, Kingston. The motion was moved by Councillor Midgley, seconded by Councillor Westwood. All those in favour, please raise your physical hands. Thank you. So those against? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. That ends the Planning Authority session. Thank you, Ms. Tyler-Moore, for your attendance this evening. The open session of Council now recommences at 6:57 p.m. So we now jump to page 119, which is petitions still being actioned. There were no petitions still being actioned. Also on page 119, petitions received in the last period. At the time that the agenda was compiled, there were no petitions that were received during that period. Still on page 119, Officers' Report to Council. We move to the Annual Budget Mid-Year Review with a recommendation on page 122. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that, please? It's moved in Councillor Westwood and seconded in Councillor Cordova. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Mayor. We have an annual budget mid-year review before us. My first comment is to say that I think it's really fantastic that we are reviewing the budget at its mid-year point. I think it makes for good financial management and good governance. The forecasts of income and expenditure after 6 months have changed, resulting to some variations in the forecasts. The forecast underlying operational result is a deficit of $496,000 against the budget figure that we initially had of $546,000. This is an improvement of $50,000 in the underlying deficit. We did have a workshop on this a couple of weeks ago. The $50,000 has been earmarked to 2 additional areas of expenditure. One is a $30,000 contribution to an electric charging station that's to be built at the Civic Centre for electric vehicles, and $20,000 to a remote working program for employees to enable a more flexible workforce to be achieved. I believe both of these are very valuable projects to add in at this point in time. We are, I think, getting a grant for an electric charging station, and part of that $30,000 will help us connect it to power. at the Civic Centre. And obviously at the moment with the COVID environment we have, a remote working program for employees will ensure council productivity and ensure we can continue to meet our business as usual responsibilities. I guess one of the things I wanted to note is that there, sorry, I've lost my train of thought, that the capital program is not predicting any large savings or over expenditure. There are predicted to be delays going forward in the delivery of the program. I guess one thing is, in my experience at the moment, there are some blowouts in costs for CapEx expenditure. I think we will need to keep a close eye on that. And I know that staff are aware of the risk of that, and we'll consider that when we do our budget in the next couple of months. So I thank staff for bringing forward a mid-year report. I do think it's a great initiative. It gives us an opportunity to fully review finances again, see how we're tracking compared to where we were when we forecast the budget. And I thank staff and urge my colleagues to support this report.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. My first question on this is just a bit of a situation analysis, please, on the materials and services section. So it says in the report on page 120, materials and services, $400,000 materials and services budget has been increased by $400,000 to match the likely costs associated with grant funds being expended in line with the allocation of recurrent grant revenue. And I note that on page 123, the variance there is nearly $700,000. Yeah, basically, I'd like a bit more detail and a bit of a situation analysis in terms of my understanding from the reports in the media is that there are significant increases in various costs associated. So, yeah, can we have a bit of analysis about that, please?
So just before I ask Mr. Breen to address that, I did ask that question myself because I wasn't sure that I could make sense of those figures. The increase that you see of just over 600,000 in materials and services predominantly relates to the seasonal work because of the heavy rain. So our works crew have been doing the additional grading of some of our unsealed roads and cleaning out of culverts and drains. And so there has been an over expenditure in that area. And because of the estimation that there will still be additional work that needs to be required through to the end of the year, that's why then on the other side of the equation, if you look at the full year budget, an additional 400,000 has been allocated to there. But Mr. Breen might be able to provide some more detail for you if that isn't all the explanation. Mr. Breen.
Yes, through you, Mayor. That was a fairly good summary of the situation at the moment. Certainly with the significant rain events we had in the first half of the year, there was a number of roads that were washed out significantly and required a lot of grading, particularly the unsealed roads, a lot of work on table drains as well to clear those out and make them fit for use again. So certainly some significant expenditure in those areas. I've had some discussions with the works manager, and he's going to be working really hard in the second half of the year, and hopefully the weather will be on our side and we can recoup most, if not all, of those funds.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, I do appreciate that answer. Through you, Mayor, before I get to, I guess, the elephant in the room, which is for me is the Kingston beach breakwater, and I know that there have been some emails flying around about that. I just want to take a moment to note how important it is that we are, if we support this recommendation, which I strongly urge we councillors to do, that we'll have this $30,000 contribution for the electric vehicle charging station at the Civic Centre. The advantage to this is that we are helping the transition to electric vehicles, and we are playing an important role by having an electric vehicle at the council by seeding the second-hand car market as fleets change and as fleets improve, but by providing that facility to really get rid of that range anxiety that people are still experiencing around electric vehicles, we're able to I guess, pave the way for what is an essential transition to take place in Tasmania. So I'm very supportive of that contribution going towards the electric vehicle charging station, and I hope that there will be more of those to come in the future. And also, of course, the $20,000 to the remote working program, which I strongly advocated for in the workshop that we had, because I feel that irrespective of the current pandemic that we're facing and the significance of it, which of course is we all understand and we all know about, but we are moving towards a situation where we need to accommodate our workforce, particularly in a tight labour market, to make sure that we have the kind of flexibility that makes our council an employer of choice and makes it easier for people to be closer to their family and their loved ones, particularly in a time of uncertainty, to be able to get work done. And there's been really fascinating studies conducted overseas that show that having those flexible working arrangements actually improves productivity, it improves health and well-being, and it makes for a better workplace and makes us more of an employer of choice. So I do strongly support those two aspects of the recommendation. And now to the idea of the $125,000 from deferrals and savings to support grant funding for improvements to the Kingston Beach breakwater. My understanding is that this is to leverage a grant that MAST is offering, but I was hoping maybe as a staff member could actually talk us through why we would do that now, as opposed to maybe pushing it out to a different year. Because obviously a street tree strategy would be, if we had $125,000 to spend, I would want to be spending it on a street tree strategy. So maybe if we could paint a picture of why it's urgent to move on this breakwater now. Thanks.
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. The reason why we're actually doing it now is because that's when the grant funds are actually available. So this is coming from a couple of different grant streams that's provided by MAST. So council officers have been working pretty closely with MAST there to try and, if you like, gain hold of these funds there, but they're not going to be available again next year. So that's the reason why we're bringing it forward now. So it's only sort of in recent times, probably in the last couple of weeks or so, that we've actually got to the point of actually realising that we'll be able to do that in terms of leveraging on that grant funding. And I guess that's the reason why we brought it up in this process.
Thank you.
Can I just add to Mr. Reeves' answer, because it's just so that it's clear what the project is. At 4.9, it does indicate also that it's about providing an accessible pathway for people who are undertaking recreational fishing, and I think that that's a really important part of this project and fits really nicely with the accessible beach ramp that we have now at Kingston Beach, and opening up opportunities for people with disabilities to have the same sort of level of access that the rest of us take for granted.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Reeve, for that answer. So to be clear, MAST, which is Marine and Safety Tasmania, is offering us their grant funding of $175,000 and has been provided. And the council, the proposal here is that we would support that with $125,000. So we're actually putting in less money than MAST is bringing to the table. But I guess my question, in addition to that, is what is the life expectancy of these improvements that we're putting in? Will this set us up for the next 100 years, or is this something that we're going to have to keep paying? Yeah, what's the life expectancy of it?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor, it's probably not the next 100 years there. Obviously, we've got a lot of other considerations that are actually happening there, including climate change and so forth, as you would be aware. But it certainly is a project there that we expect to last about 20 to 30 years was what we'd normally put on a project of that type. Bearing in mind the current project, or the current breakwater as it sits, has actually been overtopped on more than one occasion there and has been damaged. There has been some repair work that's been done to it in the past there, but the intention was always to go back there and actually do proper repairs on that, which includes what we're actually talking about tonight.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I am satisfied with this, and it's a good opportunity for me to, I guess, on the back of that, just reiterate the need to adequately resource climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies so that we can be a more resilient community, but also that this financial report yet again speaks to how well managed Kingborough's finances are and how we even in the face of significant uncertainty, do have that wiggle room thanks to good financial management, which is a credit to us all, but especially a credit to the excellent staff. So I want to thank again the author and the authoriser, and that's all for me. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Midgley next and then Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. A question in regards to why do we only see the capital budget attached and not the operational budget for the mid-year review?
Mr. Breen.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Essentially, I've just attached the, I guess, the front cover sheet for the operational budget, which just gives you the high-level variances and forecasts. So the idea was to paint a picture of where council's finances are at the end of December, and therefore the opportunities we have to come in either over or under budget. So that was the aim of that particular report.
Thank you. And can I just make a quick note? It's not totally related to this, but I feel like if I don't say it, it might be missed. I cannot remember seeing access parking at the Kingston Beach Sailing Club, but maybe I have seen it, but maybe I haven't seen, I can't remember if there's access parking signage there. So I'm just thinking if we have the access ramp being built, it's important that we do have accessible parking there, but maybe there is. I just noted it.
So that was done as part of the upgrade to the car park there at the Sailing Club. I have those spots several occasions.
I've just missed it when I've been there. And just looking at the listing of some of the items. So the demolition of the old, is that all right, Mayor, if I ask just a couple of questions about some of those budget items?
Yep.
So the demolition of the old Conningham Beach toilet, again, when I was there a month ago, I thought I saw the toilet block there. So what is happening? Is it, and I thought the community wanted to keep it to store kayaks and things like that.
So no, they don't. The community. I've had a discussion with Kalska about this. They are keen for the slab to be retained to use as a storage for dinghies, but they would like the actual structural element demolished, which I believe we are going ahead with. But Mr. Reeve can provide some additional information.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, that's correct. So it did have to go through an approval process, which is taking a little bit of time there, but we've got to the point now of actually going through that demolition, which has been or going to start that demolition, which will be happening shortly.
Great, thank you. Sorry, and may I recall it was the concrete. That's right. And just looking at the playgrounds, the Drew Point and the Donahue Gardens. So that's quite a significant amount of money towards the Drew Point, and will that be carried forward again for working on for next year as well? Just noting there's probably a lot of consultation in regards to that and the upgrade. Where are we? And that we don't have our the staff member who left who would be looking after that area, sorry, that position. Paul Donnelly's role. Yeah, so I'm just wondering if there's any updates in regards to those playground upgrades.
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, we certainly have looked at trying to fill the position of Paul, which we have done now. So we have got somebody on board to actually do that work there. What we envisage with a couple of those playground ones, including the Drew Point one, is that there will be we will get a start on some of the works there, but it'll be more in the design phase as compared to the construction phase. So there's obviously a little bit of work to be done in that, and quite a bit of work to be done on the consultation and stakeholder engagement side of things. So we'd like to get a start on that. And yes, it's more than likely that particular project there will actually carry forward into the next financial year.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Midgley. Anything further from you?
No, thanks.
No, then I'll go to Councillor Fox. Hopefully.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm pleased to hear that the breakwater beach probably being at the northern end of the beach with a walkway on top of it, but I'm relieved that it isn't, but I am disappointed. I was disappointed that it hadn't come to our workshop, but I think Mr. Reeves explained that the workshop happened before the grant became available, and I understand that it is an important project. I have seen fishermen fisher people walking along that breakwater, and I wondered how on earth they were managing to get from one end to the other, especially children with rods, and it's very rocky and quite dangerous. But I support the project, and I'm very pleased that we've got the money available, although we would be short by 35,000, and I'm just wondering where that extra 35,000 would be coming from.
Mr. Reid.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. So at this stage, obviously, we've still got a fair bit to go in terms of delivering on the capital program. We've already identified the fact that there's some potential carry forwards that will go into next year as well. At the same time, we envisage that it may come through some savings through the various projects that are yet still to be done in terms of contingencies not coming to fruition there. However, if it doesn't, we'd probably be looking at a smaller type project there to either defer or part defer to actually fund any additional money we needed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers on this? I don't have any other hands up. If not, before I ask Councillor Midgley to no, not Councillor Midgley, Councillor Westwood, I beg your pardon, to sum up. Just a brief comment from me. I'd already submitted some questions to Mr. Breen that he answered for me. I guess the challenge that we do see from this report is the one that we've already spoken about, and that is the inability to secure some of our tenders at a price because of the increase in materials prices for those projects, but also the fact that we are in a bit of a booming economy and there is that struggle to actually get people to do the work. So that is going to certainly impact our capital program moving forward. So I think we just have to be a little bit more patient with our ability to meet our targets of getting that out as fully as we can during this financial year and moving forward. But I'm really pleased to see this. I mean, obviously, yes, we still do have a underlying budget deficit, but I think that we are definitely moving in the right direction, and it just shows that over the last 5 or 6 years that we've made some significant inroads into getting rid of that underlying debt. So I thank staff for their work on this. I'm happy to support the recommendations. I think we're all excited about getting an electric vehicle charger station at the council chambers, and also the remote working program. I think that since the borders have opened, that it's become obvious that we need a robust program to enable our staff to work effectively at home when required. So it is important that we invest in that with that bit of flexibility that we now have available to us because of the prudent financial management. So thank you, and I will ask Councillor Westwood if she would like to sum up.
No, thank you, Mayor. Closed.
Thank you very much. I will put the recommendation as printed on page 122. It was for the annual budget mid-year review. It is moved by Councillor Westwood and seconded by Councillor Cordova. All those in favour, please raise your actual hands. And that looks like it is unanimous. Thank you very much. Carried unanimously. We move now to page 132, the complaints management policy, with a recommendation on page 137. I'm going to hand the chair over to the Deputy Mayor, as I was particularly keen to move this particular policy. So, Deputy Mayor, it's over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. We have before us a complaints management policy on page 132 of our agenda papers, with a recommendation on page 137 that Council adopts the complaints management policy effective 21st of March 2022. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Mayor, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Fox. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to move this complaints management policy because it is the culmination of some significant work, but importantly, we also had some public consultation on it. I think it's important to start by saying that the policy aligns with our strategic plan. At point 2.4, in that we say that we will have a culture that delivers quality customer service, that we encourage innovation, and that we have high standards of accountability. So there's a strong correlation between having this policy and our strategic plan and our vision for Kingborough. But I think really importantly, I know that can sound really bureaucratic and people's eyes glaze over when you start to talk about, visions and mission statements and so on. Importantly, what this will do will provide a clear process for members of our community if they are unhappy about the way a complaint has been handled. And so it's really about being transparent, and it's about being accountable, and about presenting the information in a way that people can understand it. So I think the flow chart that is attached will hopefully get people to understand and assist them in navigating that process. As the report says, this is based on a framework that was developed by the Victorian Ombudsman back in 2015, and it was updated in July last year. And I believe, and I stand to be corrected, but I do believe we are the first council in the state to implement this framework, which I think is terrific that we're leading the way in relation to that. At its heart of it, it actually classifies complaints into a tiered system, and that really aims to increase the fairness and provide a more consistent approach to the way it's handled. There are also a number of other improvements which make the system, I believe, far more robust than our current complaints procedures and processes. And importantly, it's that there are 8 underpinning principles, things like accessibility and transparency and accountability and objectivity and fairness. And by having a standardised complaints process, we are making it easier for our community. But I think the point that is made in the paper is a sound one, is that we shouldn't see a complaints policy as being a negative thing, because we can regard receiving a complaint as a way of learning as an organisation and improving our processes and service delivery. So it doesn't have to be a negative aspect to our work, but obviously in order to learn we need to have a proper framework, we need to track those policies and report against the complaints, and all of those features are built into this framework. We did have a workshop last October in relation to this, and we did go out to public consultation. I think it's a fair assessment to say that putting out a complaints policy didn't really capture the hearts and minds of our residents, and we only had two submissions, but thank you to those organisations and individuals who did put in submissions. I greatly appreciate the work that they put into their thoughts and providing us with that feedback. Yeah, I think this is a great step forward in terms of our accountability to the residents that we are elected to represent. Now, I do have, having said that and about what a wonderful framework it is, I do have some amendments. I did circulate them late this afternoon by email to councillors. I apologise for the lateness of those. And I believe Mrs. Morton would be able to put them up on the screen. And I'm not sure, as the seconder, Councillor Fox, if you've had a chance to look at those, but I was hoping that we might be able to, if you were open to it, that we could actually just put those amendments and incorporate them as part of the substantive recommendation.
Absolutely. I think they make sense. Thank you.
The mover and seconder are both happy with those amendments. If you'd like to put them up on the screen, Ms. Morton, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Morton. Mayor, would you like to speak to those?
Yes, so some of them are just a little bit of tidying up that was required, and just for some clarity. So the first amendment is that at the last sentence in section 2.11 that we add the following words: however the behaviour of staff in the conduct of their enforcement duties is covered. That's just to provide clarity for those people who are listening to the debate. The policy that we're considering now, when there are statutory decision-making processes, they have separate appeal processes in relation to them. However, we wanted to ensure that people can still make a complaint about the behaviour of staff in the way that they carry out those enforcement duties if they believe there is a reason to do that. And then the second dot point just follows that because it's mentioned again in clause 6.6. In clause 6.31, swapping the fourth and fifth dot points around, that's just for clarity to make it more consistent with the flow chart on the back, to just be a little bit more consistent with that. Section 6.31, where I'm asserting an additional dot point, it's just to refer to mediation. One of the respondents did suggest that perhaps we could have a time frame in there where documents needed to be exchanged in mediation. However, and I've got some advice on that. It's more appropriate that we just ask that the parties, when there is mediation, comply with the directions of the appointed independent mediator. That is quite a common provision when there's an independent mediator. I'm not inclined to put a time frame around it, because if we said something like 3 days or 5 days, if it's a much more complex problem, then those materials might not be available. So we need to be guided by the mediator rather than locking ourselves into something there. In point 5, renumbering the dot points under 6.5, that was just had been an error in the formatting. And then in the final point, 6.8.7 is just adding an additional dot point in relation to performance indicators that we would use to measure our complaint management performance. I think it would be appropriate to also include this as a performance measure, the number of officer breaches of legislation and policy. And that's just in the interests of accountability and transparency, so that we can demonstrate to the community how that we are performing as an organisation against this policy. So having said that, I will leave it to others to contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Do I have another councillor who'd like to make a contribution? I can't see any hands raised at this point in time. Not sure if that's because of my access or whether everyone is in agreement and doesn't have anything further to add. So I'll just wait for a few seconds. No one wants. Oh, Councillor Fox.
Sorry, I have a delay with when I press the buttons. It doesn't seem to happen quickly. I guess I just wanted to say that when I was first elected, I remember the staff telling me that every complaint is an opportunity to learn about the attitudes of the community, but also an opportunity to improve the system. And I think we should be very respectful of complaints and always take them very seriously as much as we can. And I think this is a wonderful document that will really help both the elected members as well as the staff, but also the community, to give them the confidence to know that they will be listened to and they will be taken seriously. So I really congratulate you, Councillor Mayor Reid. I think it's a wonderful document, and also thank you to staff for getting this prepared for us, and I thoroughly recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I guess this is to reiterate and echo that sentiment, that there is an enormous contribution that the staff have made to putting this together, particularly Mr. Malt and also our General Manager, and of course the impetus comes from the Mayor. Yeah, this, I think I'm echo, so I'll keep this brief, but I just do want to reiterate that sentence that we are a constantly growing and learning organisation, and by taking complaints seriously and responding accordingly, we'll be much more responsive to the community. And after all, by being the closest form of government to the people, that really is essential. So I think it's a testament to our commitment to working closely with the community. And I look forward to seeing the implementation of this policy and see, as it evolves and forms, how we may need to tweak it in future to make sure that it remains robust. But thanks again.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. I had one question. Just what is the reason for the effective date of the 21st of March 2022? It seems quite specific. I'm wondering if there's any particular reason behind that.
I can actually answer that. That's just to give a period of time for staff training to be undertaken before the policy comes live. So given that this is quite a substantially new framework and the flowchart, the Chief Information Officer has nominated a 6-week period that will allow that training to take place.
Great, thank you very much. So we have before us a recommendation on page 137 that Council adopt the Complaints Management Policy 1.20 effective from the 21st of March 2022. Oh, sorry, Councillor Reid, would you like to sum up?
I just wanted to, yes, just one brief sum up. It's all right, that's my trick. I just wanted to acknowledge, thank you first for those comments in relation to this framework. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this because I think it goes to the a robust complaints policy should give residents of our community an assurance that we do take their complaints seriously and that there will be a open and transparent way that they will be dealt with, that will give them the opportunity to seek review of them if they're unhappy with the outcome, but also that we learn, as we've already said. So I appreciate those comments. And I just very briefly wanted to thank our Chief Information Officer, Mr. Malt, for the work that he has done on this, but also the Kingborough Ratepayers Association have been very passionate about this as well, and have put this issue before us on a number of occasions. So I'd like to acknowledge the work that they have done in relation to this as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. So moved by Councillor Reid and seconded by Councillor Fox that Council adopt the Complaints Management Policy 1.20 effective from the 21st of March 2022. If I could have a show of hands. I think from my screen that is unanimous. The motion is carried. I'll hand the chair back over to you, Mayor.
I was muted, sorry. So I was reading off my sheet, so I couldn't see you all waving at me. I thought you were just all being very friendly. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We now move to page 150, which is the Customer Service Charter, with a recommendation on page 152. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Anyone? Anyone? Come on, I'm not selling you a house, just a Customer Service Charter. Thank you, Councillor Cordova. Moved by Councillor Cordova, seconded by Councillor Westwood. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. This is another important opportunity, and it behoves us all to thank Mr. Malt for the preparation of this document as well. Basically, what we're looking at here is that essentially all councils are required to maintain a customer service charter in accordance with the Local Government Act. As a minimum, the customer service charter must specify the principles relating to the services provided by council, and then the complaints management procedures require updating to align them. So essentially what we're looking at here is the updated policy in line with our statutory obligations. I don't have any particular questions beyond what we can see in the report, but I look forward to my colleagues delving further into it. But yes, thanks once again to Mr. Malt for putting this together.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. Councillor, anyone else? Councillor Fox.
Just quickly, on page 162, there are some typos which have flowed through from the actual report. On accessibility item 514, we will make our services accessible for our customers by supplementing in-person contact options with a range of online and voice-based payment. Requests, comma, that should be an S after requests. It should be requests, not request. Applications and information services. And similarly, 5.3.2, the last line, these will be treated in the first instance as a service requests. The A should go because it's plural. These will be treated in the first instance as service requests. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. I love it when somebody else finds grammatical errors and typos because that's normally my forte and it proves that you've read it. Thank you. Are there any further contributions? Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to note a thank you as well to the council staff, and that is a very robust charter and very easy to follow, and noting as well the response and processing time and working days, they all seem quite reasonable, and hopefully staff were engaged in seeing that these were reasonable response times as well, especially in times of COVID and short staff in some areas. And just wondering, this policy will be put on the council website, is that correct?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further speakers, Councillor Cordova, did you want to sum up? No? Then I'll put the motion. It's moved by Councillor Cordova. It was seconded by Councillor Westwood. All those in favour? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We move now to page 167, but I'm going to just call a short comfort break because I can see we've all been drinking a lot of water or cups of tea. So we'll just, if we can just keep it as brief as possible, under 5 minutes, I'm sure that others would appreciate that, so we're not keeping staff behind longer than necessary. So see you all in 5 minutes. As soon as we've got everyone back, we'll keep going. I think we've got everyone back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, welcome back. We are on page 167 now, which is the Gormley Park change rooms lease with a recommendation on page 169. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Mover and Councillor Midgley, seconded by Councillor Gladwright. Councillor Midgley. Councillor Midgley, you're muted.
Sorry, I like moving my...
Thank you.
Should know by now. I've also got mine off in case I have a child run in the door. So, yes, a report about the Gormley Park change rooms lease, and as many councillors are aware, the Kingborough Little Athletics Club has been a high frequency usage of this change room through a number of years. And the Lions Club and other soccer groups use it in winter, and I must admit is a very cold, dark, unpleasant change room to be in. So it's great to see that the Kingborough Little Athletics Club is looking to undertake a upgrade of the facilities. So noting that the recommendation is looking at a 5-year lease with a 5-year option, peppercorn rental to apply, and the lessee to be responsible for all costs associated with the use of the facilities, including service charges, maintenance and contents insurance, but excluding the hot water system. A couple of questions, Mayor, in regards to this. So are they trying to secure a funding application and grant for the upgrade in the pipeline?
I believe they have already done so. Mr. Smee can provide us with some more details.
Through you, Mayor, that is correct. The intention is to apply for funding. We will list an amount in our capital works budget to assist with that project, but the funding application is yet to go in.
Thank you. And perhaps another question for Mr. Smee. So when other clubs like the Lions or other sporting clubs utilise the changing room, do they then pay a rental fee off the Kingborough Little Athletics Club?
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor, that would need to be negotiated. We would have a clause in the lease that indicates that the Little Athletics Centre cannot unreasonably deny access to those change rooms to other users of the ground, but whether there's a fee that would apply would be something to be negotiated with the Little Athletics Centre as the head tenant of the facility.
Thank you. And with the sports precinct plan, just double checking that this all fits within that broader scope and vision, noting that that vision can be changed, varying different needs of users and things like that.
Through you, Mayor, yes, that's correct. The future directions plan does note the need for both the upgrade of the infrastructure at Gormley Park and the oval itself, and both of those matters we do intend to address subject to funding over the next financial year.
Thank you. And just to note that I have heard, I haven't been a parent that has taken my kids at Little Athletics, that takes a lot of my Saturday away, but I have heard that the numbers have dramatically increased for the Little Athletics Club this season, and it's that down to the volunteer committee that are really highly committed to attracting new children and families to the club. So big congratulations to them, and a big congratulations to all the volunteers on the committee, because I'm sure it's going to be a big job for them then to apply for the grant to administer this and to look after the change room lease as well. Sport, we spend a lot of money on sport. And one thing when I see this, and sport is really important and I value, and I was in little athletics for 12 years of my life, but I really think, gosh, what do we do for the arts in this space, and what support and peppercorn rent do we provide to any of our facilities for any arts organisations? So that's just something to keep in mind when I looked at this lease. I know it's, you know, going off a bit more than what this lease is, but I just thought it's really important to note that we do support a lot of our sporting clubs, and I'd like to see, I might discuss with the Mayor about some art options that we can perhaps look at pursuing in the future. But anyway, I hope Council support this. It is a really exciting project for the municipality, and a very much needed project as well.
Thank you. Do I have any further speakers? I can't see any hands up. Councillor Bastone.
Sorry, are we not looking at the rental of sports grounds sometime soon? So how can we give these people a peppercorn rental when we're actually going to be discussing it in the next few weeks?
So I think you, just for clarification, I think you're mixing up sports grounds users fees with the lease of the building, which is the case here. Fine. Any further speakers? Just before we close the debate, I just wanted to add some comments in relation to this, because I had previously met with representatives of the Kingborough Little Athletics Club on site, and they're certainly very passionate about being able to provide enhanced facilities for their members, and as Councillor Midgley points out, their growing number of members. And athletics tends to be a sport, I think, that has a bit of a lower profile than say soccer or cricket or AFL, but that's certainly made up for by the enthusiasm and growing number of participants, particularly at the club. And you only need a brief visit to those club rooms to appreciate how what condition that they are in. And I know, as having been a soccer mum and having seen those change rooms previously, they can't cater for girls and boys for soccer matches. And then there's issues with equipment being stored for little athletics, things like hurdles and a whole range of things. So this is the first step in being able to provide a much better facility that will benefit many people in our community. So I'm very excited about this one as well. So Councillor Midgley, I'm assuming you don't want to sum up those two contributions. Thank you very much. So I will put the recommendation. It was moved by Councillor Midgley, and I'm sorry I didn't note down who seconded it. It was seconded by Councillor Gladright. My apologies. It's the recommendation on page 169. All those in favour? Thank you. The motion is carried unanimously. We turn now to notices of motion which have been given. The first one on page 170, it's moved by Councillor Cordover. It's is in relation to state support to improve Kingborough's public safety. Do I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Fox. Thank you. Councillor Cordover.
Thank you, Mayor. The genesis of this motion is that at the last meeting of our council, we passed a motion for the advocacy to build a new police station in Kingston to accommodate a future move to 24-hour policing. And I just wanted to add a few more items to that list of things that we were asking the state government for at the time. But we were informed by the General Manager that from a procedural point of view, in order to accord with the meeting procedures regulations, it was better to move that laundry list of items as a separate motion. So that's what I'm doing here. And as you can read in the report, the purpose of this motion is essentially to broaden the conversation around public safety to include evidence-based solutions. So what I want to achieve with this is to improve resourcing, to enhance public safety, to further reduce crime, and to improve our capacity to prepare for and manage emergencies. Because there are a number of sensible and evidence-based conversations, there are a number of evidence and sensible-based propositions that we know will actually enhance public safety, and I've listed some of those. It's not an exhaustive list. I've listed those here, and I would like to lobby the state government for them. I wanted particularly to propose actual solutions that can help solve the social determinants of crime, to help us better prepare for emergencies, and to help us enhance public safety. So if you go to the Tasmania Police website, you can see that Tasmania Police itself operates under 4 key service delivery areas: public safety, for the community to feel safe and to be safe; crime, to reduce crime; traffic policing, to improve driver behaviour through law enforcement; and emergency management, to contribute towards community resilience through effective security and emergency management. Now, each one of my clauses here within the recommended motion speaks to one of those policy key service delivery areas. It probably doesn't speak much to traffic management, but my feeling is to enhance public safety in a meaningful way, we really should be focusing on making people feel and be safe, further reducing crime. Kingborough is already quite safe, but we can further reduce crime by looking at the social determinants of crime, and then ultimately to prepare for emergencies. So each of those dot points speaks to one of those things. For example, an urgent care centre is something that we have been campaigning for a very long time in Kingborough. The State South desperately needs an urgent care centre because it will directly improve Kingborough residents' safety. Recently, we've heard horror stories in the media of people waiting in emergency departments because of a lack of capacity. In September of last year, Royal Hobart Hospital figures showed that only 29% of emergency department patients were seen on time. The purpose of an urgent care centre is, as there's one in Launceston, and you can read on their website, it's basically a place that you can go designed for when you can't wait for a GP appointment, but you don't need the emergency room quite yet. So it's designed for urgent treatment for conditions that require acute treatment, though they're not life-threatening emergencies. That will take an enormous amount of pressure off the emergency departments. When you, for example, break a limb, you need urgent care, you can't wait for a GP, but you may not need the emergency department, which should be reserved for life-threatening injuries. So that's why we desperately need one of those for the South. Secondly, you can see that the next clause relates to the funding, the next 2 clauses relate to the funding of crisis accommodation and increased funding for the Women's Legal Service. Thankfully, as part of the state election recently, there was additional funding given to community legal centres, and this, I was told by the Community Legal Centres Policy Officer that $1.7 million has been started to be distributed, but the Women's Legal Service in particular, due to growing demand, they actually require more funding. And so that's another way that we could directly improve the safety of people in Kingborough. The next 2 clauses down, I mean, the reason why I'm looking immediately at a mental health inquiry and drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs and wraparound care, that speaks directly to public safety and further reducing crime. It's that notion of the social determinants of crime. The simplest way to further reduce crime is to reduce those social determinants of crime. And finally, I had a question about where the job guarantee fits into all of this. Well, this is about social pathologies, and the single biggest factor in lost productivity in our entire economy, Australia-wide, but here in Kingborough too, is unemployment. There are intergenerational consequences of unemployment and enormous social pathologies. So we know that in economics, it's this idea of the Occam gap. That's the output difference, the gap between the difference between an economy's potential and the actual GDP. And basically, the social pathologies of unemployment are well known and well documented. It's intergenerational trauma, it's poverty, it's debt, it's homelessness, it's alienation, family breakdown, stigma, financial hardship, and an increase in crime. So to summarise all of this, we talk a lot in our society about freedom to do something, so freedom to speak or freedom to move or freedom to assemble, but we don't talk enough about freedom from. You should have the freedom in Kingborough, freedom from poverty, freedom from joblessness, freedom from crime. You should have those freedoms too. So we speak a lot about freedom to, we need to start speaking as well about freedom from. The clauses within my motion speak directly to evidence-based policies that will further reduce crime, improve our capacity to respond to emergencies.
That's time.
And I guess I welcome the debate. Thank you, Mayor.
Further speakers? Councillor Wass.
Thank you, Mayor. Unfortunately, I see this motion as pie in the sky. There is no financial costing as to what the state government would be stated for if it was to go ahead. The question I ask is, why is Kingborough worse off than every other local government area in Tasmania, as Councillor Cordover is indicating? Why should the government give preference to Kingborough? I'd have to ask that. I would also believe that if we are fair dinkum about that, we need a minimum of 20, probably 30% to whet the government appetite for such funding. Where are we getting that funding from? And I think the most important aspect that we've got to cover is the prioritisation of what we want. If we don't prioritise, we get nothing. We need to work on one thing. The community have told us clearly, and we have asked the government whether they would go ahead and look at another police station in relation to 24-hour service that our community is demanding. So unless I can see all this evidence that I've asked for, then I'm sorry, but I have to speak and vote against it.
Thank you, Councillor Wass. Next I had Councillor Street, then Councillor Bastone, then Councillor Westwood. So Councillor Street.
Thank you, Mayor. It's 4 minutes to 8, and so I'm not going to take up too much time. There's not much that I can disagree with in what Councillor Cordover has said. And the reality is, when we get motions like this, the mover will hide behind the fact that there's a section of the Local Government Act that says that we make decisions for the peace order and good governance, health order and good governance, or something along those lines, of the municipal area, and say that it's all relevant. The reality is, we know something that's relevant to local government when we see it. And while there's not much that I can disagree with in what Councillor Cordover is saying, he knows full well that all of these things are state government responsibilities and responsibilities of the state parliament. We're very lucky in Tasmania that we have a system of representation that means that we've got 5 state parliamentary representatives whom the residents of Kingborough can go to with all of these concerns, including Councillor Cordover. And if they're not happy with the representatives that they have, then they get an opportunity at state election time to vote for those representatives. And I note that Councillor Cordover put himself forward in that election last time as well. So it's open to all. These are matters that really are matters for the state parliament to discuss. And I don't think we do the residents of Kingborough any favours by pretending that we are in a position, by lobbying or otherwise, to really make an impact on them, other than simply bringing attention to them, which I don't think is a good use of council's time.
Thank you, Councillor Street. Next I've got Councillor Bastone and then Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out that at the last state election, we were promised a new ambulance station for the Channel, and I think it's quite relevant that we should push for a quick resolution of that, and that it was I feel within our remit to say where we think that ambulance station should be. And I've been pushing all along for it to be in Kettering, giving access to Bruni and also through Nichols Rivulet quickly across to Cygnet and things. Now, Huon does have its own ambulance one, but most of the time, like the ones that are in Kingston, at the moment, they're off on somewhere else all over the place. They get called everywhere. So I think that the one thing out of all of what Councillor Cordova said here is that we should be really pushing for our new ambulance station and discussing where we should put it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bastone. Next I've got Councillor Westwood and then Councillor Midgley. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, my contribution is similar to Councillor Street's. I agree with Councillor Cordova that these are all very important and valuable services that our community could certainly benefit from extra funding, but these are not the responsibility of local government. These are provided by our state government. The notice of motion says that council resolves to lobby the state government for, and we've got a list from A, B, C, D, E, F and G. It's like a Christmas wish list. You can't just lobby the state government for a Christmas wish list. For example, how are we going to lobby? You know, it's okay to say, well, let's lobby for this and let's lobby for that, but how? We're going to write a letter? I don't see how that's going to be effective. I think we need to have a lot more detail behind any kind of lobbying plan, especially when we're talking about 7 different things, valuable things nonetheless. But it's not as easy as just submitting a Christmas wish list. And it's not the same as the motion that was before council on the 17th of January, because that specifically addressed funding to construct a new Kingston police station that has been around in our community as an issue for a very long time. It focuses on one issue, and we have had significant feedback about that issue, and particularly through our Kingborough Community Safety Committee. So I cannot support this motion either. It is far too broad, far too Christmas wish list, wishy-washy for me. And I'm sorry, Councillor Cordova, I know your heart's in the right place, but I don't think this is the right way of going about that.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Next, I've got Councillor Midgley. And if you have spoken, if you could lower your hand, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also agree, Councillor Cordova, your heart is definitely in the right place for this. And we have had a conversation about it. I think that it is a big list. It does cover a lot of different contexts, and I understand the context that you provided in regards to why you have put A to G as a conglomerate to lobby the government for. Absolutely agree. You know, working in the area of domestic violence for many years, absolutely. We are not there yet, and we totally need to go far, but that just doesn't feel very Kingborough specific in regards to this. They feel like very broader state government issues. But noting, though, what Councillor Bastone said in regards to urgent care for the channel, perhaps we could look at an amendment for that to maybe just include the lobbying for that point. But also in regards to the mental health services, we have spoken time again around the lack of mental health services for young people in Kingborough. I think that also is a very important one to lobby, and perhaps that needs to come again in another motion, because I don't feel like the D point really kind of covers and articulates the specific youth gap that we have here. Absolutely, there's a gap for all mental health services as well. So I could put forward an amendment to just go with A, if that is an agreement, or perhaps have another motion another time just for that.
Councillor Cordova, would you be open to such an amendment?
So is the notion is to strike items B through G and just leave construction of an urgent care centre for the State South and a new ambulance station for the Channel? Is that right? Yes, I would be happy to. Yeah, I mean, reading the room, I feel like this won't pass unless we do that. So I would, if the second is happy with that, I would be happy to get whatever I can here.
The seconder was Councillor Fox. Councillor Fox, would you be happy with that?
Yeah.
Thank you. So the motion now becomes just that council resolves to lobby the state government for construction of an urgent care centre for the State South and a new ambulance station for the Channel. So we are now speaking on that amended motion. I've got Councillor Gladeright next.
Thank you. Sorry, it's throwing me a bit because I'm now speaking to the amendment, right? I feel like perhaps we need to be a bit more strategic about this. I feel like this topic could do with perhaps a workshop, because I know that the Mayor and I have had discussions with the Volunteer Fire Brigade recently, and we were looking at a plot of land and we were talking about a combined services hub. So maybe I shouldn't be speaking right now to this amendment, but yeah, I just would like to put it out there. I think that perhaps this topic could do with a lot more strategic conversation and get some staff members involved and some other opinions.
Thank you, Councillor Gladwright. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. Speaking to this amendment, the fact is that one of the main problems that I was trying to address by talking about wraparound care and preventative and a whole of government kind of approach is that one of the problems with the way that we deal with public safety is we say public safety, more police, or we want fire protection, so another fire thing. We want ambulance, so another, and we silo everything. But
Councillor Cordova, sorry, I'm going to stop you because it's not actually technically an amended motion, even though it is, because you accepted the amendment. So it's not a separate debate and your time has expired. I'm sorry. Are there any further speakers? I just wanted to, before I ask Councillor Cordova to sum up, I just did want to make a comment about, I think the pledge to have a new ambulance station for the Channel is obviously something that we want to hold the state government accountable to, but I offer you a word of caution, and that is we don't just want them to put a new ambulance station in there, we want them to have it staffed with personnel to run the ambulances, because there is a situation at Dover where they have a fully kitted out ambulance and ambulance station and there is nobody to drive the ambulance. There are no paramedics or volunteers in that area. And so that area is then reliant on ambulances coming from Huonville, and quite often because of the distance, they need to rely on the Westpac rescue helicopter. So we need to be a bit clever in our wording to make sure that we are getting that full commitment from the state government, because otherwise it's a building which isn't going to be very useful without the personnel to back it up. The urgent care centre, yes, I think that is, with our growing population in the south, that is something that we would dearly love to see, and Kingborough would be an ideal place to have that so it could service the entire Kingston, Channel and Huon Valley community and beyond. I did want to just touch on the Councillor Midgley raised the question of youth mental health. Dr. Stevenson and I did recently have a meeting with, I think it was 3 or 4 representatives from the Tasmanian Health Service in relation to the points that have previously been raised when we've had workshops around youth issues, and the fact that there is a significant need for mental health services for young people. I'll be honest, they were pretty blunt in the fact that A, there is no money, and B, or probably the biggest problem before there's no money is that there are no psychologists available. And the reason that the trial for Headspace couldn't go beyond the 12 months that it was operating down here was for that very reason. We know there is a shortage of psychologists Australia-wide at the moment. That situation is not going to change in the near future. So they just can't get the staff to take on those appointments because there's such a drastic shortage. So it's going to be a longer term planning thing, I think, with working with institutions like the University of Tasmania to try and maybe the state government can put some incentives in for additional psychologists to fill those positions. But of course, that's a longer term plan. Certainly it was a valuable conversation. I think they are more aware now of the needs of our community, and I know that Dr. Stevenson has had some follow-up with them following that meeting as well. So I just wanted to place that on record that that's not an issue we've forgotten about, and one that I'm certainly very passionate about as well. Councillor Cordova, did you want to sum up?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to say that I really fear that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We now have before us a very specific and I think timely motion that asks for us to lobby the state government for the construction of an urgent care centre for the State South and a new ambulance station for the Channel. We were willing to do exactly the same thing for a police station in January. Look, you can't get more of a response to public safety than making sure that, you could make the argument that when you break your arm here, because you have to go to the emergency department in Hobart, well, that's not a Kingborough problem because the hospital's in Hobart. But of course it's a Kingborough problem. These are, it affects me, it affects my mum, it affects me personally, and we need to do everything that we can to pull out all the stops to make sure that the growing population of Kingborough is served well. And yes, the state government is responsible for that, and the state government has to fund it. And we have a platform, and we should use that platform to ask for money for the organisations who have actually asked for that money. We can do it in Kingborough. And, you know, I think the question was raised, why should Kingborough have the priority? Well, I'm a councillor on Kingborough Council. I'm not a councillor in one of the other 28 councils. And that's why I'm doing it, because we have this platform. We have the capacity to ask for what the people of Kingborough need, and we have a responsibility to see that through. So please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't vote against. What would that say to the state government if we voted against a motion asking for an ambulance station for the channel? We've needed this for years. The people of Kingborough want it. I want it, and that's why I moved this motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. So I'm going to put the motion, which now reads that Council resolves to lobby the state government for construction of an urgent care centre for the State South and a new ambulance station for the channel. It was moved by Councillor Cordova. It was seconded by Councillor Fox. All those in favour? Against? Oh, sorry. Beg your pardon. In favour is Councillors Fox, Bastone, Gladeright, Street, Midgley, Cordova, Westwood and Reid. Those against is Councillor Wass. The motion is carried. Turning now to page 171, we have a motion in relation to glyphosate. It's moved by Councillor Gladeright, and I need a seconder for that motion, please. Seconded by Councillor Midgley. Councillor Gladeright. You're on mute. All right, we've done it at least once. It's great. Thank you, Councillor Gladeright.
Thank you. I've been practicing saying the word glyphosate, and I'd like to pick you up on a slight mistake there, Mayor. It's glyphosate, not glyphosate, as I was often saying previously to me, practicing for tonight's motion. So the recommendation is calling for the council to prohibit the use of glyphosate in fenced children's playgrounds. I've got here in the background that glyphosate was declared by the World Health Organization as probably carcinogenic to humans. The use of glyphosate in playgrounds provides a potential risk of children being exposed to the substance, which can be mitigated by its prohibition. So as a mother of two young kids, I think I share the concerns of quite a few parents in our community. Children are inquisitive little beings, and when you pop them down for a play, often things are going in their mouth and things are being picked up. And I'm not trying to downplay the importance of parents monitoring or caregivers monitoring children. It's just their nature that they are inquisitive and they do like to get in amongst the dirt and play around. I would like to draw all the councillors' attention to the first line in the officer's response, which says, currently council officers use an organic herbicide and undertake hand weeding for weed control in fenced children's playgrounds. And as such, if council supported this motion, it can be implemented. So I've had discussions with the staff members, and they've assured me that they already have this in practice, that they're not using glyphosate in those playgrounds. So what I'm trying to do, the point of this motion is then to just firm that up and make sure that it's delivered. I had discussions with the General Manager about why it would be a policy versus just a resolution, and he explained that for such a little point like that, it doesn't require a full-length policy to be written. So he assured me that by a council resolution that it would just firm up that practice, and we can be really sure when we're communicating with parents and caregivers in our community that glyphosate isn't being used in the children's playgrounds. So I'm hoping that I can get full support for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker I have is Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. I do note on page 172 that even though we might use organic herbicides, it does say that weed officers have also trialled organic herbicides, which ironically are listed as not being allowed near drains or waterways. And just because something is registered as organic doesn't mean risks are not associated with them. And I do recall when I first learnt that council was using glyphosate a long time ago, I asked for them not to use it and to trial hot water systems and other ways of reducing weeds. But these were very expensive, very difficult to actually kill woody weeds particularly. They were not as effective as glyphosate. And the actual, I guess they are using limited amount of glyphosate wherever possible, but there are situations where they have tried other chemicals and none of them are as effective as glyphosate and often more harmful. So I would like to see a thorough report on this from staff. I realise that the response here is fairly damning of any alternatives, but perhaps another report could be provided to council. But at the moment, I just feel that the response from the staff in this report doesn't give me confidence that by not using glyphosate, we're actually putting ourselves at more risk by using alternative methods, and also less effective and more expensive. But I'd be happy to have a report. But at the moment, I don't feel confident to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Are there further speakers? Councillor Cordover.
Thank you, Mayor. I will try and explain why I think this really should be deferred for tonight and moved until after May 2022, because in May, as it says in the report, the European Food Safety Agency, which has done a very comprehensive 2-year study into this, will be releasing their report. And it's going to be quite important, I think, that if we're going to have an informed, evidence-based and data-driven discussion, that we actually use the best, most authoritative mechanisms available. And I do thank the staff for preparing a comprehensive response. But I had a very fascinating time in researching this topic quite extensively. And I think we need to be aware, firstly, of the safety of the science, of the research that is available, of the alternatives, the risks, the budgeting and the costs. And we need to make sure that we don't spread the wrong message about the safety of glyphosate. And the reason I say that is if you actually look to the International Agency on Cancer Research, as auspiced by the World Health Organization, they have various categories. And I'll note that in this report, we do talk about glyphosate, but we never talk about what else is in those categories as auspiced by the World Health Organization. So they do include things like, well, I'll just make the point that they do include things like very hot beverages over 60 degrees centigrade, emissions from frying, high temperature frying. In the same category as glyphosate is red meat, but in the above category, the higher category, it's actually processed meats. So, your salami, sausages, bacon, these are a higher category of carcinogen than glyphosate. Occupational exposure for hairdressers and barbers as a result of colorants and dyes is in the same category as glyphosate. The court cases that have happened for glyphosate have been full-time landscape gardeners. The level of exposure is not the same for a child playing on play equipment as it is for a full-time landscape gardener. But importantly, we actually need a workshop to look at the results of the comprehensive science that's being done on this so that we can actually have an informed conversation. Because, of course, in category 1, so glyphosate is in category 2, but in category 1 is sunlight, right? So sunlight is a carcinogen. Alcohol, outdoor air pollution. Now, these are all category 1 carcinogens, and the reason for that is that it's all about the level of exposure that you get. So I actually do have a question about the kind of paint that my understanding is that most paints, playground equipment paints, are acrylic latex based paints, and they are the same category as glyphosate. So unless we just need to treat this with the scientific rigor that it deserves, because it would be silly to do a blanket ban on glyphosate without contemplating what the science says, and then at the same time allow paint on the play equipment to be exactly the same carcinogenic category as glyphosate. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that the information is available, and we need our weed officers to explain it to us, and we need to have a dialogue together that is evidence-based and data-driven. Otherwise, we really do risk having uneven and really misinformed rules around this, because of course I would wager that the exposure to a child of hot chips and deep fried food is far more prevalent than glyphosate. So maybe our efforts, and certainly when it comes to the painting of the play equipment, if the play equipment paint is of the same carcinogenic category, let's have a conversation about what our priorities are here, because I feel like just by pushing this ban without following the evidence, we risk actually creating unease within the community. And we have to remember that Kingborough is not the first place in the world to consider glyphosate use. We have been working with Byron Shire Council, with Whitsunday Council. I'm aware that we're not the very first council to ever come across this issue and the fear within the community about this. That's why I really emphasise that the best thing that we can do is wait for the European Food Agency report to come out in May, have a workshop about it, and then talk about how we best communicate this with the community so that we're not spreading misinformation around the great fear that people have in the community about this issue. So with that, I now move to defer this until after the May 2022 report comes out, and we have a workshop on it.
Okay, I have a motion for deferral. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Fox. So the motion is that the matter be deferred. It's moved by Councillor Cordova, seconded by Councillor Fox. All those in favour, please raise your hands. It is, so we have in favour is Councillors Fox, Wass, Bastone, Street, Cordova, Westwood and Reid. Those against? Councillors Gladright and Midgley. The motion to defer the matter is carried. We now move to page 173. There is a motion by Councillor Gladright in relation to fire bunkers. Do I have a seconder for that motion, please? Seconded by Councillor Wass. Councillor Gladright. No, you're muted.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation is that Council take the following motion to the next general meeting of LGAT, that LGAT lobby the state government and Tas Fire Service to investigate the accreditation of fire bunkers and other structures legalised in other Australian states for use in Tasmania. So Kingborough is considered one of the most bushfire-prone municipalities in Tasmania, and currently fire bunkers are unable to be legally accredited. This is very alarming for me. I've been to many of the Kingborough community consultative forums, and often it's raised about safety for our residents during a bushfire, and we're always reinforcing the message back to these people that it's the responsibility is not councils, the responsibility is their own. They need to look into their bushfire plans and be prepared. So it's very concerning, given that we are so bushfire prone and that we're putting all of that responsibility back on people, that then when they wish to put in a fire bunker, that they can't get that accredited. I was reading the Environmental Services Quarterly Activity Report at the back of our agenda, and it talks about understanding the level of bushfire risk of specific roads in our council area, and it states that roads are identified, this is if something was to happen, but it's talking about certain roads that are identified as being very high risk in a bushfire, ideally should not be relied upon as providing a safe exit route during a bushfire emergency. I know that our municipality is quite long and with quite a lot of hills, and we have a lot of roads which go up the hill and there actually is no other exit. So it's reasonable for our residents to think about putting in a fire bunker, and if they can't be accredited, then I think that's really alarming. The motion is, I've just lost it now, the motion is trying to get the other councils to support this motion as well, and that's why it's recommending that it goes to LGAT. So I'm interested to hear what other people have to say, other councillors have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gladwright. I've got Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. I know somebody who's got a fire bunker, and I'd be very surprised if they haven't been accredited. I would like, before putting this to LGAT, if that's what we're prepared to do, to get a report from our staff, because perhaps they've been accredited through the building regulations or through independent building surveyors, and not through local government. I'd like to know what other people are doing in other states and have a much more comprehensive understanding of what is required here. So I take Councillor Gladwright's word for it that they're not able to be legally accredited, but I also wonder where that information comes from and what is that based on if it's not hearsay. Without casting aspersions, I just would like to know, because it is an important issue. We have got many roads which are very long and very long driveways as well off those roads. I've lived through the 67 bushfires. I know how many people have died in those situations, and or being unable to save their house or got stuck on the road, and people are thinking of having the bunkers and see them as an alternative. They may well not be an alternative. They may actually be death traps if they are inhaling too much smoke and they leave their time to retreat too late because they've got a false feeling of security that they have a bunker. So it's an absolutely critical issue, but I would like to have a lot more information before this goes to the LGAT. And I was wondering if anyone on the staff present would be able to comment.
I believe Dr. Stevenson might have some information she could share. Dr. Stevenson?
Yes, hello councillors, through you, Mayor. It's complex. Yes, there is. You can build bunkers in Tasmania as long as they're compliant with both the National Construction Code and our regulatory building approval processes and the planning constraints. So in some cases, there just won't be the ability to deliver within those frameworks. So that could explain why Councillor Fox knows someone who does have one, but that someone else may have been told they can't because there's no physical way of ensuring the safety of people within the bunker. Should there be a bushfire, it's non-compliant in that sense. In terms of the motion to the GAT, it might need a bit of teasing out some examples where to figure out, is it the national code, is it our building framework, or is it our planning framework that's causing the tension? So it's a complex one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. I've got Councillor Westwood next.
Thank you, Mayor. I feel similar to Councillor Fox on this one. There's not a lot of information there. Well, I've certainly had some representations over my time on council regarding fire bunkers. Before I agree that we should lobby LGAT, I think I would like a little bit more information about what the implication of that actually is.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Next, I've got Councillor Cordova. Councillor Fox, your hand is still up. If you've finished, if you could take that down, thank you. Just to make it easier, Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. I have, I think that the answer that we've heard from Dr. Stevenson just then, in my mind, certainly made me feel like by seeking clarity, that would be a good thing. So I do commend Councillor Gladwright for bringing this up, because it is this really interesting intersection across a number of different areas. Of course, I would be very cautious about making sure that people don't think that the use of a fire bunker is the only part of a bushfire survival plan. My understanding, but I could be wrong, I'd defer to the experts on this. My understanding is that it could be a very much a last resort, but people should still try and protect themselves in other ways. For example, leaving early. I think if there is this kind of ambiguity about where it sits and what the regulations are and whether or not they are indeed safe if they're not built to certain accreditations and standards, I think this could be an area where it would be a good thing for Legat to take a look at it. And so on the basis of that, of what we've just heard from Dr. Stevenson, I think I'll be supporting this motion. But I would say also that I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Westwood in terms of getting a bit more information. Basically, I feel like our job is to distill as much information as possible so that we can be very clear and concise with the community about what the expectations are and what the regulations are. So right now, I can't find anything on the Kingborough Council website that really does that job. And so I would like to find any solution that we can to get that done, because that will serve our community well. So thank you once again to Councillor Gladwright, and I'll be supporting the motion at this stage.
Thank you. Next on the list, I have Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I was just wondering if the General Manager was aware of this matter ever coming before LGAT, or if he has any other things to comment.
I think probably Dr. Stevenson might be. She's across this. If Dr. Stevenson could answer that. No?
Sorry, I'll get there eventually. Sorry, could I confirm, Councillor Midgley, did you say, is this already a matter with the LGAT?
No, sorry if it has been raised. Just want yourself.
Not in my recollection, and certainly not in the last year, but I don't recall it having been raised in my time there.
Don't know if the General Manager had anything else to add.
Through you, Mayor, only to say that I'm aware of one case where accreditation has proven very difficult to achieve in Kingborough. I'm not aware of a particular example that Councillor Fox referred to. So I'd need to have more detail on that to know where that is and what the circumstances were.
Thank you, General Manager. Councillor Wass.
Thank you, Mayor. I support the recommendation because I think it's a discussion that we need to have. I think it gives us an opportunity to tease out information to take to Legat. If the accreditation of bunkers is not readily available, then I think we need to know the required specifications so our community can look at them. But I do believe that we need to act in the sense that it is not necessarily the first line of defence. I mean, we don't want to give people a false sense of security. If they're going to depart, we don't want them to bring their departure down to the last minute because this will be fine and then they get trapped in the fire, and that's not what we want. But I think as a last resort, if it can save lives, then we need to consider it. And we are bushfire prone, not only in this municipality but statewide. People have sought them. Other people may well consider. Other people won't consider because they've got a fire plan that gets them out of the area or gets them to another safe place. But I think we owe it to our community to look at it and investigate it. So I'll support.
Thank you, Councillor Wass. Do I have any further speakers? If not, I'll ask Councillor Gladwright if you would like to sum up.
Thank you, Mayor. I think just hearing all of your responses and asking all those questions that raise more and more questions, and the fact that we haven't got to the bottom of anything is a really good indication that this should go to LGAT. I think we need some help here to get to the bottom of this, and I think they're the ones to do that on behalf of all of us. And if it comes back with some clarity, then I think that's going to be really beneficial to everybody.
Thank you very much. So I'll put the motion now. It is moved by Councillor Gladright and seconded by Councillor Fox. Is that correct? Apologies, I didn't write that down. Who seconded the motion?
Midgley.
Oh, seconded by Councillor Midgley. Oh, what's just happening there?
Through you, Mayor.
Sorry, Councillor Was.
Councillor Was.
Councillor Was. Thank you very much. My apologies, I didn't write that down. I'll put the motion. We'll need to go back to full screen so I can see people's hands, if you wouldn't mind, Mrs. Morton. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we've lost Councillor Westwood because she ran out of, oh no, she's there. Okay, good, because you've run, I understand your battery has gone flat on your laptop. So I'll put the motion as printed on page 173, moved by Councillor Gladright and seconded by Councillor Wass. All those in favour, please raise your hands. I can't actually see your hand yet, thank you. So, okay, so it's Councillor Cordova, Bastone, Gladright, Westwood, Wass, Midgley and Street and Reet. And those against? Councillor Fox. Thank you. The motion is carried. We now move to page 173, confirmation of items to be dealt with in closed session. That in accordance with Regulation 15 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulations 2015, Council by absolute majority moved into closed session to consider the following items: confirmation of minutes, applications for leave of absence and processing of recyclables, establishment of a joint authority. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Mover in Councillor Fox, seconded by Councillor Bastone. All those in favour? Thank you. Yep, motion is carried unanimously. This now ends the open session of Council, and in accordance with Kingborough Council Meetings Audio Recording Guidelines Policy, recording of the open session of Council will now cease at 8:37 p.m. Can I thank everyone who has been watching along at home on YouTube. It is our intention to continue to meet online for the foreseeable future, so that we can ensure that the health and safety of our members and, importantly, our council staff are looked after. So we do hope to be back in person as soon as we can. We will review this at the end of the month, depending on what the COVID situation is. So good night to everyone at home.